Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the humid New Orleans air clung to my skin as I stepped out onto the back porch, a cold beer in hand. It had been another long day at the office, and I was looking forward to unwinding in the peace of my backyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that usually calmed my nerves. But tonight, something felt off. I took a swig of my beer and called out, "Max, here, boy." The gentle thumping of paws on hardwood preceded my golden retriever's appearance. Max bounded out onto the porch, his tail wagging furiously. I couldn't help but smile. I'd had Max for 5 years now, ever since he was a puppy, and he'd been my constant companion through thick and thin. "How's my good boy doing?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. Max leaned into my touch, his eyes closing in contentment. We sat there for a while, enjoying the evening. The cicadas buzzed their nightly chorus, and fireflies began to flicker in the growing darkness. It was a scene of tranquility, one I'd grown accustomed to since moving to this old house on the outskirts of New Orleans. As night fell, I stood up to head inside. "Come on, Max. Time for dinner." But Max didn't move. His ears were perked up, his body suddenly tense. I followed his gaze to a spot near the back of the yard, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. "What is it, boy? You see something?" Max let out a low growl, a sound I'd rarely heard from him before. Then, without warning, he bolted off the porch and raced towards the back of the yard, barking furiously. "Max!" I called out, startled by his sudden change in behavior. "Max, come back here!" But he didn't listen. He stopped at the far end of the yard, near an overgrown area I'd been meaning to clear out. His barks grew more aggressive, echoing through the night air. I jogged over to him, my heart racing. "Max, what's gotten into you?" As I approached, I scanned the area, half expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a stray cat, but there was nothing there, just shadows and overgrown vegetation. I reached for Max's collar, but he shrugged me off, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Come on, boy. There's nothing here." But Max wouldn't budge. He continued to bark, his voice growing hoarse with the effort. I'd never seen him like this before. Max was usually such a calm, gentle dog. This aggressive behavior was completely out of character. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to drag Max back to the house. He whined and resisted the whole way, his eyes never leaving that spot in the yard. Once inside, I locked the door and turned to Max. "What the hell was that about, huh?" Max paced restlessly, letting out small whimpers. I filled his water bowl, which he lapped at eagerly, his barking having left him parched. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me, but I couldn't. I found myself peeking out the window every few minutes, half expecting to see something sinister lurking in the shadows of my backyard. As I prepared for bed, I called my sister Sarah. She'd always been my sounding board, and I needed to talk to someone about what had happened. "Hey, Rob." Sarah's voice came through the speaker. "Everything okay? It's pretty late." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just something weird happened with Max tonight." I recounted the evening's events to her, my unease growing as I relived the experience. "That does sound strange," Sarah said when I finished. "Max has always been such a sweetheart. Maybe he saw an animal or something?" "Maybe," I replied, unconvinced. "But I've never seen him react like that to anything before. And there was nothing there, Sarah." I looked. "Could be he's not feeling well," she suggested. "Why don't you take him to the vet tomorrow just to be safe?" "Yeah, that's probably a good idea," I agreed, though in my gut I felt this was something more than a simple health issue. We chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodnight. I climbed into bed, exhausted but wired. Max lay on his bed in the corner of the room, his eyes still alert, occasionally letting out a low whine. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, trying to convince myself as much as him. Everything's fine. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside my window had me on edge. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying Max's uncharacteristic behavior over and over again. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by Max's bark. My heart leaped into my throat as I sat up, fumbling for the bedside lamp. Max was standing at the window, his fur standing on end, that same aggressive bark tearing from his throat. I stumbled out of bed and to the window. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, shadows stretching across the lawn. And there, in the same spot as before, I saw nothing. Just the same overgrown patch of yard. "Max, quiet!" I hissed, my nerves frayed. "There's nothing there." But Max wouldn't stop. He barked and barked, the sound echoing in the quiet night. I was sure the neighbors would complain in the morning. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, Max quieted. He retreated from the window but remained alert, his eyes fixed on the yard outside. I sank back onto the bed, my heart still racing. What was going on? Max had never acted like this before. He'd always been a calm, well-behaved dog. This sudden aggression, this fixation on a seemingly empty spot in the yard, it was all so out of character. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I gave up on sleep. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my eyes drawn repeatedly to the backyard. In the harsh light of day, it all seemed so ridiculous. A dog barking at nothing. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I picked up my phone and called the vet's office the moment they opened. "Hello, Crescent City Veterinary Clinic," a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Robert Landry. I need to make an appointment for my dog, Max. It's kind of urgent." "Of course, Mr. Landry. What seems to be the problem?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. How could I explain this without sounding crazy? "Mr. Landry, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry," I said, clearing my throat. "It's just, Max has been acting strange, barking aggressively at nothing. It's not like him at all." "I see," the receptionist said, her tone professional. "We have an opening at 2 p.m. today. Would that work for you?" "Yes, that's perfect. Thank you." I hung up the phone and looked at Max. He was lying by the back door, his eyes still trained on the yard outside. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm morning air. "What's out there, boy?" I whispered. "What are you seeing that I can't?" Max whined in response, and in that moment, I knew that whatever was going on, it was far from over. This was just the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. As I prepared for the day ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change dramatically. The peaceful existence I'd built for myself in this quiet corner of New Orleans suddenly felt precarious, as if balanced on the edge of a knife. I looked out at my backyard one last time before leaving for work. In the bright morning light, it looked perfectly ordinary, but now I knew better. Somewhere out there, hidden from my eyes but not from Max's, lurked a mystery, and whether I wanted to or not, I was going to have to unravel it. With a deep breath, I locked the door behind me and headed to my car. The day ahead loomed, filled with uncertainty and a growing sense of unease. But one thing was certain. I would get to the bottom of this, for Max's sake and my own. Little did I know, the quiet life I had known was about to be turned upside down, all because of a dog's unsettling bark in the night. The harsh fluorescent lights of my office seemed to buzz louder than usual as I stared blankly at my computer screen. The words on the document before me blurred together, my mind unable to focus on the task at hand. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit of another sleepless night. "Robert? Robert? Are you listening?" I snapped back to attention, realizing my boss Janet had been speaking to me. "I'm sorry, what was that?" Janet's brow furrowed with concern. "I asked if you had finished the Peterson report. It was due this morning." My stomach dropped. The Peterson report. I'd completely forgotten about it, my mind consumed by Max's strange behavior and my own growing unease. I'm still working on it, I stammered, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I'll have it to you by end of day, I promise. Janet's frown deepened. This isn't like you, Robert. Is everything okay? I opened my mouth to assure her that everything was fine, but the words caught in my throat. Was everything okay? I honestly didn't know anymore. I've just been having some trouble sleeping, I admitted. My dog's been acting strange, barking all night. It's probably nothing. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't nothing. The memory of Max's aggressive barking, his eyes fixed on that spot in the backyard, sent a shiver down my spine. Janet's expression softened. Why don't you take a break? Get some fresh air. The Peterson report can wait an hour. I nodded gratefully and made my way out of the office. The humid New Orleans air hit me like a wall as I stepped outside, but it was a welcome change from the sterile office environment. As I walked down the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Guidry. Your dog's been barking all morning. Is everything all right? I felt a knot form in my stomach. Max was still at it, even during the day now. I quickly typed out a response. Sorry about that. He hasn't been feeling well. I'm taking him to the vet this afternoon. I pocketed my phone and leaned against a nearby wall, closing my eyes. The lack of sleep was really starting to get to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark spot in my backyard, imagining all sorts of sinister things lurking just out of sight. Hey, Rob, you look like hell, man. I opened my eyes to see my coworker, Mike, standing in front of me, a look of concern on his face. Thanks, Mike. You really know how to make a guy feel special, I replied, trying to inject some humor into my voice. Mike chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. Seriously, though, you okay? You've been off all week. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know, man. It's complicated. Girl troubles? Mike asked, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head. I wish it was that simple. It's my dog, Max. He's been acting strange lately, barking at nothing all hours of the night. I can't sleep, I can't think straight. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Mike frowned. Have you taken him to the vet? I'm taking him this afternoon, I replied. But I don't think it's a medical issue. It's like he's seeing something that I can't. And it's scaring the hell out of him. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. It sounded crazy, even to my own ears. I braced myself for Mike's laughter, for him to tell me I was being ridiculous. But Mike's expression remained serious. You know, my grandma used to say that dogs can see things we can't, spirits and such. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the oppressive heat. You don't really believe that, do you? Mike shrugged. I'm just saying, maybe there's more to it than meets the eye. Have you looked into the history of your house? I shook my head. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Might be worth checking out, Mike suggested. This is New Orleans, after all. Every old house has a story. With that unsettling thought, we made our way back to the office. The rest of the day passed in a blur of missed deadlines and concerned looks from my coworkers. By the time 2 p.m. rolled around, I was more than ready to leave for Max's vet appointment. The waiting room of the Crescent City Veterinary Clinic was mercifully cool compared to the sweltering heat outside. Max sat at my feet, unnaturally still and alert. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for some unseen threat. Max Landry? A vet tech called out. I stood up, gently tugging on Max's leash. Come on, boy. Dr. Robichaud, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, greeted us with a warm smile. So, what seems to be the problem with Max today? I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain without sounding completely insane. He's been barking. A lot. At nothing. Dr. Robichaud nodded, encouraging me to continue. It started a few nights ago, I went on. He just fixated on this spot in the backyard and started barking. aggressively, and he won't stop. He's up all night barking at nothing. It's not like him at all. Dr. Robichaud listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. Has there been any change in his routine? Any new animals in the neighborhood? I shook my head. Nothing's changed. That's what's so strange about it. Dr. Robichaud began examining Max, who remained unnaturally still throughout the process. Well, physically, he seems fine. No signs of pain or discomfort. His hearing and vision appear normal for his age. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. If there was nothing physically wrong with Max, what could be causing this behavior? Have you considered that there might be something in your yard that's agitating him? Dr. Robichaud suggested. Perhaps a burrowing animal or an unfamiliar scent? I shook my head. I've checked. There's nothing there. Dr. Robichaud was quiet for a moment, her hand absently stroking Max's fur. Mr. Landry, I don't typically suggest this, but have you considered that there might be, well, a less conventional explanation? I felt my heart rate pick up. What do you mean? She looked slightly embarrassed. Well, this is New Orleans. We have a rich history of supernatural occurrences. I'm not saying I believe in such things, but I've had more than one patient whose odd behavior was attributed to, shall we say, spiritual disturbances. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. First Mike and now Dr. Robichaud. Was everyone in this city superstitious? I don't know about all that, I stammered. Dr. Robichaud nodded understandingly. Of course, it's just something to consider. In the meantime, I can prescribe a mild sedative for Max to help him sleep at night, but I'd recommend looking into other potential causes for his behavior. I left the vet's office with a prescription and more questions than answers. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. Could there really be something supernatural going on? The rational part of my brain rebelled against the idea, but after nights of Max's relentless barking, I was willing to consider almost anything. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Guidry peering out her window. I waved, trying to appear normal, but she quickly drew her curtains. Great. Now my neighbors thought I was the crazy dog guy. Inside, Max immediately went to the back door, his body tense, a low growl emanating from his throat. There's nothing there, boy, I said, my voice sounding unconvincing even to my own ears. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. The lack of sleep was really starting to take its toll. As my eyes drifted shut, I found myself wondering about the history of this house. What secrets might it be hiding? My dreams that night were fitful, filled with shadowy figures and Max's incessant barking. I woke up multiple times, each time half expecting to see something sinister lurking in the corners of my room. As dawn broke, I gave up on sleep entirely. I stumbled to the kitchen, desperate for coffee. As the machine gurgled to life, I looked out at my backyard. In the pale morning light, it looked perfectly ordinary. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, I typed, History of 1542 Magnolia Street, New Orleans. As the search results loaded, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Whatever I was about to discover, I had a feeling it would change everything. The mystery of Max's behavior was just the beginning. Something told me I was about to uncover secrets that had long been buried, secrets that someone, or something, didn't want revealed. With a deep breath, I clicked on the first link, ready to delve into the hidden history of my home. Little did I know, the truth would be far more shocking and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark kitchen as I scrolled through page after page of historical records. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I couldn't stop. Every new piece of information about 1542 Magnolia Street only deepened the mystery. Built in 1897, original owner, Thomas Beauregard, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1912. I muttered to myself, jotting down notes. A sudden bark from Max made me jump. nearly knocking over my cold cup of coffee. He was at the back door again, his fur standing on end as he growled at the darkness beyond. "Easy, boy," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "There's nothing out there." But even as I said it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Was there really nothing out there? Or was there something I just couldn't see? I glanced at the clock, 3:47 a.m. I'd been at this for hours, and yet I felt no closer to understanding what was happening. With a sigh, I closed my laptop and stood up, stretching my stiff muscles. "Come on, Max," I said, patting my thigh. "Let's try to get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of hidden wells, disappeared owners, and things that go bump in the night. When my alarm finally went off at 7 a.m., I felt like I'd barely closed my eyes. I stumbled through my morning routine, downing cup after cup of coffee in a futile attempt to clear the fog from my brain. As I was about to leave for work, I paused at the back door, looking out at the yard. In the harsh light of day, it looked perfectly ordinary. And yet, "I'll figure this out, Max," I promised, giving him a pat on the head. "Just hang in there, buddy." Work was a blur of missed deadlines and concerned looks from coworkers. By lunchtime, I could barely keep my eyes open. "Rob?" "Earth to Rob." I blinked, realizing my coworker Sarah had been trying to get my attention. "Sorry, what?" Sarah frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. "I asked if you wanted to grab lunch. Are you okay? You look terrible." I ran a hand over my face, feeling the stubble I'd forgotten to shave. "I'm fine, just not sleeping well." Sarah's frown deepened. "Is this about your dog? The one that's been barking all night?" I nodded, too tired to even be surprised that she knew about it. Word travels fast in a small office. "Have you thought about, I don't know, getting rid of it?" Sarah suggested hesitantly. I felt a flash of anger cut through my exhaustion. "Get rid of Max? Are you kidding me? He's family." Sarah held up her hands defensively. "I'm just saying, if it's affecting your work like this." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air." I stormed out of the office, ignoring the stares of my coworkers. The humid New Orleans air hit me like a wall as I stepped outside, but I welcomed it. Anything to clear my head. As I walked aimlessly down the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "Heard you've been asking about 1542 Magnolia. Meet me at Café du Monde at 7 p.m. if you want to know the truth." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Who could have sent this? And what did they know? The rest of the workday passed in a haze of anticipation and nerves. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, I was a bundle of nervous energy as I made my way to Café du Monde. The cafe was bustling with tourists and locals alike, the air thick with the smell of coffee and beignets. I scanned the crowd, unsure who I was looking for. "Robert Landry?" I turned to see an elderly man watching me intently. He was thin and weathered, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "That's me," I said cautiously. "And you are?" "Name's Clarence," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I hear you've been poking around the history of your house." I sat down, studying Clarence carefully. "How do you know about that?" Clarence chuckled, a dry sound that turned into a cough. "Son, in this city, the dead have ears, and they don't much like their secrets being dug up." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm evening. "What do you mean? What secrets?" Clarence leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your house, 1542 Magnolia. It's got a dark history, darker than you can imagine. The man who built it, Thomas Beauregard, he wasn't just some wealthy plantation owner. He was into some bad things. Voodoo, black magic, you name it." I listened, transfixed, as Clarence spun a tale of dark rituals, disappearances, and a curse that had plagued the house for over a century. "But what does this have to do with my dog?" I asked when he finally paused for breath. Clarence's eyes glittered in the dim light of the cafe. Animals are sensitive to these things, boy. Your dog, he's not barking at nothing. He's barking at something you can't see. Something that's been trapped on that property for a long, long time. I felt my blood run cold. Trapped? What do you mean, trapped? Clarence opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by a sudden commotion at the entrance of the cafe. We both turned to look, and in that moment of distraction, Clarence vanished. I blinked, looking around wildly. Clarence? Clarence. But he was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. I sat there, my mind reeling from everything I'd just heard. Could it be true? Was there really something supernatural going on at my house? As I made my way home, my thoughts were a jumble of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to dismiss Clarence's story as the ramblings of a crazy old man. But another part, a part that grew stronger with each passing moment, couldn't shake the feeling that he was telling the truth. I pulled into my driveway, my headlights illuminating the front of my house. In the harsh glare, shadows seemed to dance across the facade, taking on sinister shapes. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and made my way to the front door. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard Max barking inside, the sound more frantic than ever. "It's okay, boy," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm home." As soon as I opened the door, Max bolted past me, racing towards the backyard. Without thinking, I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. Max stopped at the far end of the yard in the same spot he'd been fixated on for days. But this time something was different. The ground seemed to be moving. I approached cautiously, my eyes straining in the darkness, and then I saw it. A patch of earth, no bigger than a manhole cover, slowly sinking into the ground. "What the hell?" I muttered, taking a step closer. Suddenly, the ground gave way completely, revealing a gaping hole. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and a musty, damp smell wafted up from the darkness below. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was a well. An old, hidden well, right here in my backyard. As I stared into the inky blackness of the well, I felt a presence behind me. I whirled around, half expecting to see Clarence or some ghostly apparition. But there was nothing there. Just the empty yard and the quiet New Orleans night. I turned back to the well, my heart racing. What secrets lay hidden in its depths? And more importantly, what had I just unleashed by uncovering it? As if in answer, a cold wind blew across the yard, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. Max whined, pressing himself against my leg. I reached down to comfort him, my eyes never leaving the well. "It's okay, boy," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "We'll figure this out." But as I stood there, staring into the abyss I'd uncovered, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. Whatever was going on here, whatever secrets this house held, I had a sinking feeling that uncovering them might just be the biggest mistake of my life. And yet, I knew I couldn't stop now. I was in too deep. The mystery of 1542 Magnolia Street had its hooks in me, and I knew I wouldn't rest until I uncovered the truth, no matter how terrifying that truth might be. With one last look at the well, I turned and headed back to the house, Max following close at my heels. Tomorrow, I decided I would start digging, both literally and figuratively. Whatever secrets this house was hiding, I was going to uncover them all. As I closed the back door behind me, I could have sworn I heard a faint laugh carried on the night breeze. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there but shadows and the yawning mouth of the well, a silent sentinel in the darkness of my backyard. The musty smell of old paper filled my nostrils as I hunched over a stack of ancient property records in the dimly lit basement of the New Orleans Public Library. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to uncovering the truth about 1542 Magnolia Street. "Mr. Landry?" A soft voice called out, making me jump. I looked up to see Ms. Thibodeau, the elderly librarian who had been helping me with my research. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Did you find what you were looking for?" I rubbed my eyes trying to focus. "I'm not sure, Ms. Thibodeau. There's so much here, but nothing that explains." I trailed off, not sure how to explain what I was really looking for without sounding crazy. "How do you tell someone you're trying to find out why your dog is barking at a possibly haunted well in your backyard?" Ms. Thibodeau's eyes softened with understanding. "Sometimes, Mr. Landry, the answers we seek aren't in the official records. Sometimes, we need to listen to the whispers of the past." I blinked, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" She glanced around as if making sure we were alone, then leaned in close. "That house of yours, it's got a history, a dark one. Have you heard about the Beauregard curse?" I shook my head, my heart racing. "No, what's that?" Ms. Thibodeau's voice dropped to a whisper. "They say Thomas Beauregard, the original owner, made a deal with a voodoo priestess. He wanted power, wealth, influence, but such things always come at a price." I leaned in, hanging on her every word. "What happened?" "The story goes that Beauregard didn't hold up his end of the bargain. The priestess cursed him and his property. They say his soul is trapped there, unable to move on, forever guarding a terrible secret." A chill ran down my spine. "A secret? What kind of secret?" Ms. Thibodeau shook her head. "That's where the story ends, I'm afraid. But there have been incidents over the years. Unexplained noises, strange sightings. People who lived there reported feeling like they were being watched. I thought about Max's relentless barking, the feeling of unease that had settled over me since moving in. Has anyone ever tried to, I don't know, break the curse?" Ms. Thibodeau's eyes widened. "Oh, honey, you don't want to mess with that kind of power. Some things are better left buried." As if on cue, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. Ms. Thibodeau crossed herself quickly. "We should go," she said, her voice shaky. "It's not safe to talk about such things after dark." I gathered my notes, my mind reeling from this new information. As we made our way upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Outside, the humid New Orleans night enveloped me like a warm, damp blanket. The streetlights cast a sickly yellow glow, barely penetrating the thick fog that had rolled in from the Mississippi. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Guidry. "Your dog's been howling for hours. Is everything okay?" I cursed under my breath. I'd been so caught up in my research, I'd lost track of time. Poor Max must be beside himself. I raced home, my tires screeching as I pulled into the driveway. The moment I opened the front door, Max barreled into me, nearly knocking me over. "Easy, boy," I said, trying to calm him. But Max was frantic, pulling at my sleeve, trying to drag me towards the back door. Okay, I'm coming," I said, following him out into the backyard. The fog was even thicker here, swirling around my ankles like ghostly tendrils. Max led me straight to the well, which gaped open like a mouth in the earth. As I approached, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices. Whispering voices, emanating from the depths of the well. I leaned in closer, straining to make out the words. They seemed to be chanting something, over and over. "Gardez le secret. Gardez le secret." My high school French was rusty, but I knew enough to translate, "Keep the secret." Suddenly a gust of wind whipped through the yard, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke and something else, something metallic and coppery. The voices grew louder, more insistent. "Gardez le secret, gardez le secret." Max started barking frantically, snapping me out of my trance. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, my voice shaky. As if in answer, my phone buzzed again. It was another text, this time from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep. Stop now, or face the consequences." I stared at the message, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Who could have sent this? And how did they know what I was doing? Just then, I heard a noise from the front of the house. Footsteps on the porch, then a knock at the door. Cautiously, I made my way back inside, Max following close at my heels. I approached the front door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. I opened the door to find a man standing there. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Robert Landry?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. I nodded, unable to find my voice. "My name is Marcus Devereaux," he said. "I believe we need to talk about your house." I hesitated, every instinct telling me not to trust this stranger, but something in his eyes, a mix of urgency and understanding, made me step aside. "Come in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus entered, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. When he spoke again, his voice was low and urgent. "Mr. Landry, I know this is going to sound crazy, but you're in danger. Great danger. The forces you've awakened, they're not to be trifled with." I sank into a nearby chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. "Who are you? How do you know about this?" Marcus's expression was grim. "I'm what you might call a specialist. I deal with unusual cases, hauntings, curses, things that most people don't believe in. And your house, Mr. Landry, is one of the most unusual cases I've ever encountered." I leaned forward, hanging on his every word. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Marcus wove a tale that seemed too fantastic to be true. He spoke of secret societies, ancient rituals, and a power struggle that had been going on for centuries, right under the noses of everyday New Orleans citizens. "The well in your backyard," Marcus said, his eyes intense. "It's not just a well. It's a gateway, a portal to something else, something that was never meant to be unleashed." I thought about the voices I'd heard, the strange smells, the feeling of being watched. "What do we do?" Marcus stood up, pacing the room. "We need to seal it, permanently, but it won't be easy. The forces guarding it, they won't give up without a fight." As if to emphasize his point, a loud crash came from the backyard. We rushed to the window to see a large branch had fallen, narrowly missing the well. Marcus turned to me, his expression deadly serious. "We're running out of time, Mr. Landry. Whatever's down there, it's getting stronger. We need to act now, or it might be too late." I looked at Max, who was watching us with intelligent eyes, then back at Marcus. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. I was about to embark on a journey into the unknown, facing dangers I couldn't even imagine. But as I stood there, the echoes of the past swirling around me like the fog in my backyard, I knew I had no choice. Whatever secrets 1542 Magnolia Street held, whatever dark forces were at play, I was now a part of it. And I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's our next move?" Marcus's eyes glinted with a mix of approval and worry. "We prepare for battle, Mr. Landry, because make no mistake, that's exactly what this is. A battle for your home, your sanity, and quite possibly your soul." As his words hung in the air, another gust of wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and I had a feeling that before this was over, they would become a deafening roar. But I was ready to face whatever came next, ready to uncover the truth about 1542 Magnolia Street, no matter where it led me. The past was calling, and it was time to answer. The early morning mist clung to the ground as I stood in my backyard, my hands shaking as I gripped the shovel. Marcus stood beside me, his face a mask of grim determination. Max whined softly at my feet, his tail tucked between his legs. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the spot where we'd last seen the well. "We need to know what we're dealing with, Robert. The only way to do that is to dig." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Okay, let's do this." With trembling hands, I plunged the shovel into the earth. The ground was surprisingly soft, almost as if it wanted to reveal its secrets. As I dug deeper, the air grew thick with an acrid metallic smell that made my stomach churn. "Keep going," Marcus urged, his voice tense. "We're close. I can feel it." Sweat poured down my face as I continued to dig, each shovelful of earth revealing more of the well's stone structure. And then suddenly, my shovel hit something solid. "I found something," I called out, my heart racing. Marcus was at my side in an instant, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Clear away the dirt, carefully." With shaking hands, I brushed away the loose soil, revealing a large, flat stone covered in strange symbols. As the last of the dirt fell away, the symbols began to glow with an eerie blue light. "Oh my God," I breathed, stumbling backward. "What is that?" Marcus knelt by the stone, his fingers tracing the glowing symbols. "It's a seal," he murmured, "an ancient seal meant to keep something in or out." As if in response to his touch, the ground began to tremble. A low rumbling sound emanated from beneath our feet, growing louder by the second. "We need to get back," Marcus shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from the well. No sooner had we retreated than the sealed stone cracked with a deafening boom. A plume of foul-smelling smoke billowed out, bringing with it a cacophony of whispers that seemed to fill the air around us. "Gardez le secret. Gardez le secret." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were practically screaming in our ears. Max began to bark frantically, his eyes wild with fear. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The smoke dissipated, the whispers faded, and an eerie silence fell over the backyard. What just happened?" I asked, my voice shaky. Marcus's face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "We've done it, Robert. We've broken the seal. The well is open." I stared at him in disbelief. "Is that a good thing?" Before he could answer, a new sound reached our ears. It was coming from the well, a soft rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on stone. Tap, tap, tap. We exchanged a glance, both of us knowing what we had to do next. Slowly, cautiously, we approached the well. The tapping grew louder as we neared, echoing off the stone walls. I peered over the edge, half expecting to see some monstrous creature staring back at me. Instead, I saw only darkness. "We need light," Marcus said, pulling out a flashlight from his bag. As the beam pierced the darkness, I gasped. There, about 10 feet down, was a small ledge, and on that ledge sat a box, ornately carved and sealed with the same glowing symbols we'd seen on the stone. "Is that—" I began, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "That's what we're here for. That's what's been calling to us." "How do we get it?" I asked, eyeing the steep walls of the well. Marcus pulled a length of rope from his bag. "We climb." The next few minutes were a blur of fear and adrenaline as we lowered ourselves into the well. The air grew colder and damper as we descended, and that acrid metallic smell grew stronger. Finally, my feet touched the ledge. It was narrow, barely wide enough for both of us to stand. The box sat between us, its symbols pulsing with that eerie blue light. "Now what?" I asked, my voice echoing off the stone walls. Marcus reached out, his hand hovering over the box. "We open it." As his fingers touched the lid, a jolt of energy surged through the well. The whispers returned, louder than ever, swirling around us like a tornado of sound. "Gardez le secret! Gardez le secret!" With a grunt of effort, Marcus pried open the lid. A blinding light erupted from within, forcing us to shield our eyes. When the light faded, I looked down to see the contents of the box. Inside was a small leather-bound book and a strange metallic object that looked like a key. "What is all this?" I asked, reaching for the book. Marcus grabbed my wrist, stopping me. "Careful. These objects, they're powerful, dangerous. We need to be cautious." Suddenly, a new voice joined the whispers. This one was clearer, more distinct, and it was calling my name. "Robert. Robert Landry." I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Who's there? Who are you?" The voice chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I am the guardian of this place, the keeper of secrets, and you, Robert Landry, have awakened me. A figure began to materialize in the darkness beyond our ledge. It was hazy at first, like smoke given form, but slowly it solidified into the shape of a man. He was tall and imposing, dressed in clothes from another era. His eyes glowed with the same eerie blue light as the symbols. Thomas Beauregard. Marcus breathed, his voice filled with awe and fear. The figure, Beauregard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You've been busy, haven't you? Digging up the past, asking questions that should remain unanswered. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. We just want to understand. What is all this? What's happening to my house? Beauregard's eyes flashed. Your house? This was my house long before it was yours, boy, and it holds secrets you couldn't begin to comprehend. He gestured to the box between us. That book contains knowledge that could reshape the world. And that key, well, let's just say it opens doors better left closed. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear I could see in his eyes. We're not leaving without answers, Beauregard. Whatever you're guarding, whatever secret you're keeping, it's causing harm. It needs to end. Beauregard's laughter echoed off the walls of the well. End? Oh, this is just the beginning. You've set in motion events that cannot be stopped. The secret will out, and the world will tremble. With that, he began to fade, his form becoming smoke-like once more. Choose wisely, Robert Landry. The path you're on leads to places you may not want to go. And then he was gone, leaving us alone in the darkness of the well. I turned to Marcus, my mind reeling. What do we do now? Marcus's eyes were fixed on the box, his expression unreadable. We take these, he said, carefully lifting the book and the key. And we prepare ourselves. Because Beauregard was right about one thing. This is just the beginning. As we climbed out of the well, the weight of what we'd discovered settled over me like a shroud. My simple life, my quiet home in New Orleans had become the center of something vast and terrifying, and I was now irrevocably part of it. Back in the yard, Max greeted us with worried whines, pressing himself against my leg. I patted his head absently, my eyes drawn to the house. My house. It looked different now somehow. Older, more ominous. What have we unleashed? I whispered, more to myself than to Marcus. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. Something that's been waiting a long time to be free. But remember, Robert, knowledge is power. And now, we have the knowledge. I nodded, trying to draw strength from his words. But as we made our way back into the house, the book and key safely tucked away in Marcus's bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the eye of a storm that had been brewing for over a century and was now, finally, about to break. The discovery we'd made in the well was just the first piece of a much larger puzzle, and as I closed the door behind us, shutting out the eerie quiet of the backyard, I knew that our real journey was only just beginning. The secrets of 1542 Magnolia Street were starting to unravel, and I had a feeling that before this was over, nothing would ever be the same again. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its deep, resonant tones echoing through the silent house. I sat at my kitchen table, the leather-bound book from the well open before me, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and diagrams I couldn't begin to understand. The strange key lay beside it, catching the dim light and seeming to pulse with an inner energy. Marcus had left hours ago, promising to return in the morning with resources that might help us decipher the book's contents. But I couldn't sleep. The events of the day played on repeat in my mind, each replay bringing new questions and fears. Max lay at my feet, his ears perked up, alert to every small sound. Despite my exhaustion, I felt wired, every nerve on edge. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, making me jump. I chided myself for being so jumpy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house felt different now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting. I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles, and made my way to the kitchen window. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, the shadows long and deep. The well was just a dark circle in the ground, innocent looking if you didn't know what lay beneath. And then I saw it. A movement, just at the edge of my vision. A shadow, darker than the rest, moving near the well. My heart leaped into my throat. What the hell? Max was on his feet in an instant, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I put a hand on his collar, holding him back. "Easy, boy," I whispered, my eyes never leaving the yard. The shadow moved again, more distinctly this time. It was a figure, hunched and furtive, creeping towards the well. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional. "There's someone in my backyard," I whispered urgently. 1542 Magnolia Street. They're near the well. Please hurry. "Officers are on their way, sir. Stay inside and lock your doors. Do not engage with the intruder." I ended the call, my hand shaking. The figure was at the well now, bent over it, doing something I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. Max's growl grew louder and I tightened my grip on his collar. "Shh, boy. We can't let them know we're here." But it was too late. The figure straightened suddenly, its head turning towards the house. Even from this distance, I could feel its gaze lock onto me. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the figure began to move towards the house. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the lock on the back door, my hands slick with sweat. Where were the police? How long had it been since I called? The figure was halfway across the yard now, moving with purpose. In the moonlight, I could make out more details. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothes. I backed away from the door, pulling Max with me. "Come on, boy. We need to hide." We made our way to the front of the house, my mind racing. The book and key were still on the kitchen table. Should I go back for them? No, there wasn't time. A loud crash from the back of the house made me jump. The intruder was inside. "Max, go!" I hissed, pushing the dog towards the stairs. We raced up, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated. Where could we hide? The bedroom? No, too obvious. The bathroom? Too small. Footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and deliberate. The intruder was taking his time, confident in his pursuit. In a flash of inspiration, I remembered the attic access in the hallway ceiling. I reached up, fumbling with the latch, and pulled down the ladder. "Up, Max. Go." Max scrambled up the ladder, and I followed close behind, pulling the ladder up after me and closing the hatch as quietly as I could. The attic was pitch black and stifling hot. Dust tickled my nose, and I fought the urge to sneeze. Max pressed against my leg, trembling slightly. Below us, the footsteps continued their slow progress through the house. I could hear doors opening and closing, drawers being pulled out. "Where are you, Mr. Landry?" a voice called out, smooth and cultured. "I know you're here. I just want to talk." I held my breath, willing my racing heart to quiet. How did he know my name? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They paused, and for a moment, I dared to hope he might give up and leave. But then I heard a chuckle. Clever, but not clever enough. The attic hatch creaked as it was pushed open. Light flooded in, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure climbing up into the attic. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a tailored suit that seemed out of place for a midnight break-in. "Ah, there you are," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "And you've brought your dog. How quaint." Max growled, positioning himself between me and the intruder. I put a hand on his back, as much to steady myself as to calm him. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "What do you want?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Elias Beauregard, and I believe you have something that belongs to me." My mind raced. Beauregard, the same name as the ghost in the well. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Elias tisked, shaking his head. "Come now, Mr. Landry. Let's not play games. The book and the key. Where are they?" Before I could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the night air. Relief flooded through me. The police were here. Elias's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "It seems our conversation will have to wait. But make no mistake, Mr. Landry. This isn't over." With surprising agility for a man his age, Elias descended the ladder. I heard his footsteps racing down the stairs and out the back door. I sagged against the attic wall, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush. Max whined softly, nuzzling my hand. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We're safe now." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Elias Beauregard knew who I was, knew what I had found, and he would be back. I made my way down from the attic on shaky legs, Max close at my heels. The sound of police radios filled the air as officers swarmed the property. "Mr. Landry?" a voice called out. "This is the police. Are you all right?" "I'm here," I called back, making my way downstairs. "I'm okay." The next hour was a blur of questions and statements. I told the police everything I could about the intruder, leaving out the supernatural elements of the story. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. As the last police car pulled away, I stood on my front porch, watching the first hints of dawn color the sky. The events of the night felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't quite shake off. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Marcus. "On my way. Don't touch anything. We need to talk." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. The discovery in the well, the ghost of Thomas Beauregard, and now this midnight intruder. It was all connected, part of a mystery that was growing deeper and more dangerous by the hour. As I went back inside, locking the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Elias Beauregard's words echoed in my mind. "This isn't over." No, I thought, looking at the book and key still sitting innocently on my kitchen table. This isn't over at all. It's only just beginning. And as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, I steeled myself for whatever was coming next. Because one thing was clear, the secrets of 1542. Magnolia Street were not going to give themselves up without a fight. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from me, Marcus pored over the leather-bound book, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is remarkable," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I've never seen anything quite like it." I leaned forward, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Can you read it? Do you know what it says?" Marcus looked up, his eyes bright with excitement and something else. Fear, maybe. "Some of it. It's written in a mixture of languages and codes. Latin, Greek, some kind of alchemical cipher. It's going to take time to fully decipher." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. "What about last night? This Elias Beauregard, who is he?" Marcus's expression darkened. "That's what worries me the most. The Beauregard family was supposed to have died out decades ago. If there's a living descendant..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window, to the spot where the well lay hidden in the backyard. A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Max, who had been dozing at my feet, leapt up with a bark. "Are you expecting anyone?" Marcus asked, his hand moving to the book protectively. I shook my head, my heart racing. "No, you don't think..." "Mr. Landry," a voice called from outside. "This is Detective Rousseau. I'd like to ask you a few more questions about last night's incident." I exhaled, relief washing over me. "Just a moment," I called back. I opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man in a rumpled suit standing on my porch. His dark eyes scanned the interior of the house before settling on me. "Detective Rousseau," he said, flashing his badge. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Of course, please." Rousseau's gaze landed on Marcus, who was still seated at the kitchen table. "And you are?" "Marcus Devereaux," Marcus replied smoothly. "I'm a friend of Robert's. I came over when I heard about the break-in." Rousseau nodded, though I could see suspicion in his eyes. "Mind if I ask you a few questions, Mr. Devereaux?" For the next hour, Rousseau grilled us both about the events of the previous night. I stuck to the story I'd told the responding officers, that I'd seen an intruder in the backyard, called 911, and hidden in the attic until the police arrived. "And you've never seen this man before?" Rousseau asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "Never had any contact with anyone named Elias Beauregard?" I shook my head. "Never. I don't understand why he targeted me." Rousseau's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Landry, in my experience, home invasions like this are rarely random. The perpetrator knew your name, knew what he was looking for. Are you sure there isn't anything you're not telling me?" I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. "I'm telling you everything I know, Detective." Rousseau held my gaze for a long moment before sighing and closing his notepad. "All right. We'll increase patrols in the area, but I strongly suggest you consider staying somewhere else for a few days. This Beauregard character might come back." After Rousseau left, I slumped into a chair, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "What are we going to do, Marcus? I can't keep lying to the police." Marcus leaned forward, his expression grave. "We don't have a choice, Robert. If we tell them the truth about the well, the ghost, this book, they'll think we're crazy. Or worse, they might believe us and try to take the book. We can't risk that." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration building. "So what then? We just sit here and wait for Elias to come back?" Marcus shook his head. "No. We prepare. And we keep working on decoding this book. Whatever secret the Beauregards have been guarding, it's in here. And it might be our only chance of understanding what we're up against." Over the next few hours, Marcus and I pored over the book, trying to make sense of its cryptic contents. Some passages were in languages I recognized: Latin, Greek, even bits of what looked like Sanskrit, while others were written in symbols I'd never seen before. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a diagram near the center of the book. It showed a series of concentric circles, each filled with strange symbols and lines. "I think this is some kind of map." I leaned in, squinting at the faded ink. "A map of what?" "I'm not sure," Marcus admitted. "But see these lines here? They remind me of ley lines, supposed channels of mystical energy that crisscross the earth." As we studied the diagram, a chill ran down my spine. "Marcus, doesn't this look familiar to you?" He frowned, looking closer. "What do you mean?" With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and brought up a map of New Orleans. "Look," I said, holding the phone next to the book. "The pattern, it's the same. This isn't just any map, it's a map of New Orleans." Marcus's eyes widened. "My God, you're right. But why? What's so special about New Orleans?" Before I could respond, Max started barking frantically. We both turned to see him standing at the back door, his fur bristling. "What is it, boy?" I asked, moving to the window. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, a movement caught my eye. A figure, standing at the edge of the property, partially hidden by the trees. "Marcus," I hissed. "Someone's out there." Marcus was at my side in an instant. "Can you see who it is?" I squinted, trying to make out details. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothes. As I watched, it raised a hand, beckoning to us. I think it wants us to come outside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Robert, no. It could be Elias. It could be a trap." But something in my gut told me this wasn't Elias. This was something else entirely. I have to go out there, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I have to know. Before Marcus could stop me, I was moving towards the back door. Max whined as I passed him but didn't try to follow. The humid New Orleans air hit me like a wall as I stepped outside. The figure remained where it was, still beckoning. As I approached, details began to come into focus. It was a man, but not Elias. This man was younger, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the shadows. "Who are you?" I called out, my heart pounding. The man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You know who I am, Robert. We've met before." And suddenly, I did know. The ghost from the well, Thomas Beauregard. How are you here?" I stammered. "In the daylight?" Thomas's form flickered, like a candle in the wind. "The veil is thinning, Robert. The secret is close to being revealed. I don't have much time." He gestured towards the house. "The book. You've seen the map?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. "It's not just a map of New Orleans," Thomas said urgently. "It's a key to unlock power beyond your wildest dreams, or your darkest nightmares." "What kind of power?" I asked, finding my voice at last. Thomas's form flickered again, more violently this time. I'm not allowed to say. But you must be careful, Robert. Elias, he doesn't understand. He thinks he can control it, but he can't. No one can." "Control what?" I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. "Please, I need to know." But Thomas was fading, his form becoming translucent. "Find the points on the map, Robert. Follow the lines, but be warned. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the backyard with more questions than answers. I turned back to the house to see Marcus standing in the doorway, his face pale. "Robert, who were you talking to?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You're not going to believe this, but I think I just had a conversation with a ghost." As I recounted my conversation with Thomas to Marcus, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "A key to unlock power," he mused, "and points on the map. Robert, I think I know what we need to do next." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Marcus's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "We need to follow the map. Find these points Thomas was talking about. It's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this mystery." As his words sank in, I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. We were about to embark on a journey into the unknown, guided by a cryptic map in an ancient book and the words of a ghost. But as I looked back at the spot where Thomas had stood, I knew we had no choice. Whatever secret lay hidden in the streets of New Orleans, whatever power the Beauregards had been guarding for generations, it was up to us to uncover it. And so, with the sun high in the sky and the humid New Orleans air thick around us, we began to plan our next move. The mystery of 1542 Magnolia Street was about to lead us on a journey through the hidden heart of New Orleans, a journey that would change everything. Little did we know, the true test of our resolve was yet to come. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Marcus and I set out, the ancient book tucked safely in my backpack. The streets of New Orleans were quiet, save for the occasional early morning jogger or delivery truck. The air was thick with humidity, promising another sweltering day. "Where to first?" I asked, consulting the map we'd copied from the book. We'd identified several points that seemed to correspond with notable locations around the city. Marcus pointed to a spot near the French Quarter. St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. It's the oldest cemetery in the city, and it's right on one of the ley lines we identified. As we made our way through the awakening city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every passerby a possible agent of Elias Beauregard. We reached the cemetery just as it opened to visitors. The white above-ground tomb stretched out before us, a silent city of the dead. The air felt different here, heavy with history and secrets. "What exactly are we looking for?" I whispered. the quiet of the cemetery making me hesitant to speak at full volume. Marcus shook his head. I'm not sure, but according to the book, this spot is significant. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual. We wandered through the narrow paths between the tombs, our eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Suddenly Max, who had been trotting quietly beside us, stopped and let out a low growl. What is it, boy? I asked, following his gaze. There, partially hidden behind a large tomb, was a figure. As we watched, it stepped into view, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was Elias Beauregard. Mr. Landry, Mr. Devereaux, he said, his voice smooth and controlled. I thought I might find you here. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between me and Elias. How did you know we'd be here? Elias smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've been following this mystery far longer than you have. I know every step of the journey. I found my voice at last. What do you want, Elias? Why are you doing this? Elias's expression hardened. What I want, Mr. Landry, is what's rightfully mine. The book, the key, the power they unlock, it all belongs to the Beauregard family. And what about Thomas? I shot back. Does he agree with you? For the first time, Elias looked surprised. You've spoken with Thomas? I nodded, emboldened by his reaction. He warned us about you, said you don't understand the power you're dealing with. Elias's face contorted with anger. Thomas is a fool. He's the one who doesn't understand. This power could change the world, and he wants to keep it locked away. Maybe he has good reason, Marcus interjected. Power like that, in the wrong hands. And who are you to decide whose hands are right or wrong? Elias snapped. You're meddling in affairs you can't possibly comprehend. As they argued, I noticed something strange, a symbol, carved into the side of the tomb Elias had been standing near. It matched one of the symbols from the book. Guys, I said, but they were too engrossed in their argument to hear me. I approached the tomb, running my fingers over the carved symbol. As I touched it, I felt a jolt of energy, like a static shock but stronger. Suddenly, the world around me seemed to blur. The sounds of the cemetery faded away, replaced by whispers and the sound of rushing wind. Images flashed before my eyes, New Orleans as it was centuries ago, rituals performed in secret, a power beyond imagination barely contained. And then, as quickly as it had started, it was over. I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. Robert! Marcus was at my side, his face etched with concern. What happened? I looked up to see that Elias was gone. Where did he go? Marcus helped me to my feet. He ran off when you collapsed. Robert, what did you see? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I'm not sure. It was like I was seeing the past, the history of this place, of the Beauregards, of the power they've been guarding. Marcus's eyes widened. The tomb must be some kind of focal point, a nexus of the energy we've been tracking. I nodded, the realization dawning on me. And I bet there are more like it, at each of the points on our map. We spent the next few hours examining the tomb, copying down the symbols we found carved into its stone. By the time we left the cemetery, the sun was high in the sky and the streets were bustling with tourists and locals alike. We need to find the next point, Marcus said as we walked. If each location gives us more information. He was cut off by the ringing of my phone. I pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number. Hello? Mr. Landry. It was Elias's voice. I hope you enjoyed your little history lesson. I stopped walking, my free hand clenching into a fist. What do you want, Elias? I want to make a deal, he said. Meet me at the Beauregard Keyes house in an hour. Come alone, bring the book, and I'll tell you everything you want to know. Before I could respond, he hung up. I relayed the conversation to Marcus, who shook his head vehemently. It's a trap, Robert. You can't go alone. But what if it's not? I argued. What if this is our chance to get answers? Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. At least let me come with you. I'll stay out of sight, but I'll be there if you need backup. After some debate, I agreed. An hour later, I found myself standing in front of the Beauregard Keys house, a historic home that had once belonged to the Beauregard family. Marcus was hidden across the street, watching from the window of a small cafe. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door. It swung open almost immediately, revealing Elias. "Mr. Landry," he said, gesturing for me to enter. "I'm glad you came. Please follow me." He led me to a study at the back of the house. The room was filled with antique furniture and old books, giving it the feel of a museum exhibit. "I suppose you're wondering why I brought you here," Elias said, taking a seat behind a large desk. I remained standing, my hand resting protectively on my backpack. "You said you'd give me answers." Elias nodded. "And I will. But first I need you to understand something. The power we're dealing with. It's not just some parlor trick or magic show, it's real, tangible power. The kind that can reshape reality itself." "And what do you plan to do with this power?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Elias leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Change the world, Mr. Landry. Imagine a world without disease, without poverty, without war. That's what this power could achieve." I shook my head. "And you think you're the one to wield it? That you have the right to make those decisions for everyone?" "Who else?" Elias shot back. "The government? Corporations? At least I have a vision, a purpose." As he spoke, I noticed something on the desk. A photo, old and faded, of a man who looked remarkably like Elias. But the clothes were all wrong. They looked like they were from the early 1900s. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the photo. Elias's expression softened slightly. "My grandfather. The last Beauregard to truly understand the power we possess." I picked up the photo, studying it closely, and that's when I saw it. A ring on the man's finger with a familiar symbol. "The key," I breathed. "It's not just a key, is it? It's this ring." Elias's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "Very observant, Mr. Landry. Yes, the ring is the key, and I need it to complete the ritual." "What ritual?" I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew. The map, the points of power throughout the city, it was all leading to some grand, arcane ritual. Elias stood, his demeanor changing from cordial to menacing in an instant. "I think you've figured out quite enough, Mr. Landry. Now, hand over the book." I took a step back, my hand tightening on my backpack. "No, I don't think I will." Elias's face contorted with anger. "You fool! You have no idea what you're interfering with." He lunged forward, reaching for my backpack. I dodged, but he was quicker than I expected. His hand closed around the strap, and we grappled, the backpack between us. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of light. I felt a surge of energy course through me, and then I was falling, tumbling through space and time. Images flashed before my eyes, New Orleans through the centuries, rituals performed in secret, a power beyond imagination barely contained. I saw the Beauregards, generation after generation, guarding their secret, wielding their power in the shadows. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. I found myself back in the study, on my knees, gasping for breath. Elias was sprawled on the floor nearby, looking equally shaken. What was that?" I managed to ask. Elias sat up slowly, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "The power, it's awakening. We've triggered something, Mr. Landry, something big." As if in response to his words, the ground began to tremble. Books fell from shelves, and the chandelier above us swayed dangerously. I struggled to my feet, grabbing my backpack. "We need to get out of here." For once, Elias didn't argue. We raced out of the house just as Marcus came running up. "Robert, what happened? I saw the light and—" His words were cut off by a deafening rumble. We turned to see a crack forming in the street, stretching out in a line that seemed to follow the ley line on our map. "It's starting," Elias said, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. The awakening is beginning. As we stood there, watching the crack in the street grow, I realized that we had crossed a point of no return. Whatever power the Beauregards had been guarding all these years, it was now unleashed, and we were the only ones who had any hope of controlling it. The early morning mist clung to the ground as Marcus, Elias, and I stood at the edge of the French Quarter. The crack that had appeared in the street the day before had grown overnight, snaking its way through the city like a dark river. The air thrummed with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "We need to find the source," Elias said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't contain this power soon, who knows what might happen?" I shot him a wary glance. Just yesterday, this man had been our enemy. Now, faced with the consequences of our actions, we found ourselves in an uneasy alliance. Marcus nodded grimly. "The book mentions a focal point, a place where all the ley lines converge. That has to be where the power is strongest." I pulled out the map we'd copied from the book, studying it intently. According to this, the convergence point should be right under St. Louis Cathedral. We made our way through the quiet streets, the tension between us palpable. As we approached the cathedral, the energy in the air intensified. I could feel it buzzing in my teeth, making my skin crawl. "Look," Marcus whispered, pointing to the ground. The crack in the street had widened here, and from its depths, a faint blue light pulsed in rhythm with the thrumming energy. Elias stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "This is it. The power we've been seeking all along." I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Wait. We don't know what we're dealing with here. We need to be careful." Elias shook off my hand, his face twisted with impatience. "We don't have time for caution, Mr. Landry. Every moment we waste, the power grows stronger. We need to harness it now, before it's too late." Before I could argue further, the ground beneath our feet began to shake. The crack widened suddenly, the blue light intensifying to a blinding glare. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, but his warning came too late. The earth gave way beneath us, and we plummeted into darkness. I felt the rush of air around me, heard Elias and Marcus shouting, and then... impact. I groaned, blinking away stars from my vision. We had landed on some kind of stone floor, surrounded by walls that seemed to glow with the same blue light we'd seen from above. "Is everyone okay?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I'm all right," Marcus responded, his voice coming from somewhere to my left. "Never better," Elias grunted, pulling himself to his feet. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I gasped. We were in a vast underground chamber, its walls covered in intricate carvings and symbols that matched those in the book. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it, "The ring," Elias breathed, his eyes fixed on the object atop the pedestal. It was the same ring we'd seen in the photograph, its metal gleaming in the eerie blue light. As we watched, it seemed to pulse with power, each beat sending ripples of energy through the air. "This is it," Elias said, stepping towards the pedestal. "The key to unlimited power. With this, we can reshape the world." I moved to block his path. "Wait. We don't know what that thing is capable of. We need to think this through." Elias's eyes flashed with anger. "Think it through? We're standing on the brink of the greatest discovery in human history, and you want to think it through?" Marcus stepped between us, his hands raised placatingly. "Both of you calm down. We need to approach this rationally." But rationality seemed to have abandoned us in this strange, pulsing chamber. The energy in the air was intoxicating, filling my head with visions of possibility. I could see why Elias was so eager to claim this power. Suddenly, a new voice echoed through the chamber. "I warned you, didn't I?" We all spun around to see Thomas Beauregard materializing before us, his ghostly form more solid than I'd ever seen it. "Thomas," Elias growled, "come to stop us, have you?" Thomas shook his head sadly. "I've come to show you the truth, Elias. The truth about the power you so desperately seek." With a wave of his hand, the chamber around us seemed to dissolve. We found ourselves standing in a New Orleans of the past, watching scenes play out like a movie. We saw the first Beauregard discover the power, saw him use it to build wealth and influence. We saw subsequent generations grapple with the responsibility, some using it for good, others for personal gain. And then we saw the disasters. Hurricanes conjured by a Beauregard's unchecked ambition. Plagues unleashed by attempts to cure disease. The very fabric of reality warping under the strain of too much power in the hands of imperfect humans. "This is why we became guardians," Thomas said, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "Not to use the power, but to protect the world from it." As the visions faded, we found ourselves back in the underground chamber. Elias stood frozen, his face pale with shock. I had no idea," he whispered. I stepped forward, my mind reeling from what we'd seen. "So what do we do now? We can't just leave this power here, unprotected." Thomas nodded. "You're right. The time of passive guardianship is over. The power has awakened and it needs new guardians. Guardians who understand the weight of the responsibility." He turned to face all of us, his eyes seeming to peer into our very souls. "Are you willing to take on this burden? To protect the world from a power that could destroy it?" I looked at Marcus, saw the determination in his eyes, and knew he felt the same way I did. Even Elias, shaken by the visions of the past, seemed to have found a new resolve. "We'll do it," I said, my voice steady despite the enormity of what I was agreeing to. Thomas smiled, a look of relief washing over his spectral features. "Then it's time for you to receive the true treasure of the Beauregards, not the power itself, but the knowledge to control it." He gestured to the pedestal, and the ring rose into the air, floating towards us. As it neared, it separated into 3 smaller rings, each pulsing with that same blue energy. "These rings will connect you to the power," Thomas explained. "They will allow you to sense disturbances, to channel the energy when needed, and to pass on your knowledge to future guardians." With trembling hands, we each took a ring. The moment I slipped mine on, I felt a surge of energy course through me. Suddenly, I could sense the ley lines crisscrossing the city, could feel the pulse of power beneath our feet. "What now?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with awe. Thomas began to fade, his form becoming translucent. "Now you learn. You grow. You protect. The journey ahead of you is long and fraught with danger, but I have faith in you all." As he disappeared completely, the chamber around us began to shake. "We need to get out of here," Elias said urgently. We raced for the opening we'd fallen through, the rings on our fingers glowing with power. As we reached the surface, we turned to see the crack in the street sealing itself, the blue light fading away. Standing there in the early morning light, the 3 of us exchanged glances. We were no longer enemies or reluctant allies. We were guardians, bound by a shared purpose and an incredible secret. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "where do we start?" Marcus smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "We start by learning everything we can, about the power, about the history, about ourselves." Elias nodded, a look of determination on his face. "And we stay vigilant. There will be others who seek this power for themselves. We must be ready." As we stood there, the weight of our new responsibility settling on our shoulders, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The mystery of 1542 Magnolia Street had led us on an incredible journey, one that had changed us all forever. And as the sun rose over New Orleans, I knew that our greatest adventure was just beginning. We were the new guardians of an ancient power, protectors of a hidden treasure beyond imagination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we might face, we would face them together. For the sake of New Orleans, for the sake of the world, we had to. The hidden treasure of the Beauregards was now ours to protect. And protect it we would, no matter the cost. The sultry New Orleans evening wrapped around me like a warm blanket as I stood on my back porch, watching Max play in the yard. It had been 6 months since that fateful day in the chamber beneath St. Louis Cathedral, and life had taken on a surreal quality that I was still struggling to fully comprehend. I absently twisted the ring on my finger, feeling the familiar pulse of energy that had become a constant companion. Max suddenly stopped his frolicking, his ears perking up as he stared intently at the spot where the well had once been. "It's okay, boy," I called out softly. "There's nothing there anymore." And it was true. The well that had started this whole adventure had vanished, sealed by the same power that now coursed through my veins. The backyard looked perfectly ordinary, betraying no hint of the extraordinary events that had transpired here. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway broke me from my reverie. Moments later, Marcus appeared around the side of the house, a stack of old books tucked under his arm. "Evening, Robert," he greeted, climbing the porch steps. "Ready for another night of study?" I nodded, gesturing for him to come inside. "As ready as I'll ever be. Any word from Elias?" Marcus shook his head as we entered the house. "Not since last week. He's still in Europe, tracking down leads on other potential power nexuses." We made our way to the living room, which had been transformed into a makeshift library and war room. Maps covered the walls, marked with potential ley lines and power spots. Stacks of books on occult history and mystical energy filled every available surface. As we settled in, spreading out the night's research materials, a familiar tension filled the air. It was the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that we were now the guardians of a power that could reshape reality itself. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence. "Are we doing the right thing? Keeping this power a secret?" Marcus looked up from the tome he was perusing, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I sighed, struggling to put my thoughts into words. "It's just, this power could do so much good. Cure diseases, end poverty, stop wars. Are we right to keep it hidden?" Marcus leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "We've been over this, Robert. Remember what Thomas showed us? The disasters caused by past Beauregards trying to use the power for good?" I nodded, the vision still vivid in my mind. I know. It's just, sometimes it feels like we're not doing enough." "We're doing plenty," Marcus assured me. "Every time we neutralize a ley line disturbance or prevent someone from accidentally tapping into the power, we're saving lives. It may not be as flashy as curing cancer, but it's just as important." Before I could respond, a sharp pain lanced through my head. I gasped, clutching my temple. Beside me, Marcus winced, his hand going to his own ring. "You feel that?" I asked through gritted teeth. Marcus nodded grimly. "A disturbance? A big one. French Quarter, if I'm not mistaken." We were on our feet in an instant, grabbing our coats and heading for the door. As we climbed into Marcus's car, I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and excitement. This was what we had been training for. The streets of the French Quarter were unusually quiet as we arrived. The typical bustling nightlife seemed subdued, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation. We made our way towards Jackson Square, following the pull of our rings. As we neared the square, we saw it, a swirling vortex of blue energy hovering above the statue of Andrew Jackson. "My God," Marcus breathed. "I've never seen one this powerful before." People were gathering at the edges of the square, phones out, recording the supernatural spectacle. A few braver souls were inching closer, drawn by the hypnotic pulsing of the energy. "We need to contain this," I said urgently, "before someone gets hurt." Marcus nodded, his face set with determination. "Remember your training. Focus on the energy. Visualize closing it off." We stepped forward, raising our hands towards the vortex. I could feel the power surging through me, responding to my will. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to close the rift. But something was wrong. The vortex was fighting back, growing larger instead of smaller. Wind whipped around us, and I could hear screams as onlookers were buffeted by the increasing gale. "It's too strong," I shouted over the howling wind. "We can't do this alone." Just as despair began to set in, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Elias, his eyes glowing with the same blue energy as the vortex. "Looks like I got here just in time," he said, a wry smile on his face. With Elias joining our efforts, the tide began to turn. The vortex shrank, its wild energy being forced back into the ley lines beneath the city. With a final, thunderous crack, it disappeared entirely. The square fell silent save for the confused murmurs of the crowd. In the distance, I could hear police sirens approaching. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said urgently. We slipped away before the authorities arrived, making our way back to my house. As we settled in the living room, the adrenaline of the night's events began to wear off, leaving us exhausted but exhilarated. "That was too close," I said, breaking the silence. "If Elias hadn't shown up when he did..." Elias waved off my concern. I felt the disturbance as soon as I landed in New Orleans, came straight from the airport. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "The disturbances are getting stronger, more frequent. Something's changing." Elias nodded grimly. "I've seen it in Europe too. The power is becoming more active, harder to control. It's like it's waking up." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "What does that mean for us? For the world?" "It means," Elias said slowly, "that our job just got a whole lot harder. We're not just guardians anymore. We're the only thing standing between this power and global catastrophe." The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Marcus spoke up. "So what do we do now?" I stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the New Orleans night was alive with lights and music, blissfully unaware of the forces at play beneath its streets. "We do what we've been doing," I said, turning back to face my fellow guardians. "We learn, we train, we protect, but we also prepare. If the power is truly awakening, we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Elias nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "We'll need to step up our efforts, recruit more guardians, establish a network. We can't be everywhere at once. And we need to dig deeper into the Beauregard history," Marcus added. "There might be clues about what's causing this awakening, how to stop it." As we began to plan, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. 6 months ago, I had been a normal guy, living a quiet life in New Orleans. Now, I was part of something greater, something that could determine the fate of the world. The mystery of 1542. Magnolia Street had led me down a path I never could have imagined. It had brought danger, yes, but also friendship, purpose, and a connection to something truly extraordinary. As the night wore on and plans were made, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we might face, we would face them together. We were the guardians of an ancient power, protectors of a hidden world. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I knew that this was more than just a new day. It was a new beginning, the start of a grand adventure that would test us in ways we couldn't even imagine. The power was awakening, and we would be there to meet it, come what may. For the sake of New Orleans, for the sake of the world, we had to be ready. And ready we would be. The attic creaked ominously as I ascended the rickety ladder, each step sending a shiver down my spine. The musty air filled my nostrils, a potent mixture of dust and forgotten memories. I'd been putting off this task for weeks, but with Mom's insistence growing stronger by the day, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. It was time to clear out the attic of our old family home in Washington, D.C. "Samantha, are you up there yet?" Mom's voice echoed from below. I called back, my voice muffled by the thick layer of dust. "Yeah, Mom. Just got up here. It's a mess." Well, don't spend all day up there. Just grab what you can and we'll sort through it later. I sighed, flicking on the single bare bulb that illuminated the cramped space. Shadows danced across piles of cardboard boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and various knickknacks from a lifelong past. Where to even begin? My eyes landed on a stack of boxes in the far corner, labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. Sam's old things. Perfect, I thought. Might as well start with my own stuff. As I made my way across the attic, careful not to trip over the exposed beams, my heart began to race. There was something thrilling about digging through these relics of my past. What forgotten treasures might I uncover? I pulled the first box towards me, sending up a cloud of dust that made me cough and sputter. Real glamorous, Sam, I muttered to myself, waving away the particles dancing in the dim light. The box was filled with the usual suspects: old school reports, macaroni art, and hand-drawn birthday cards. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest as I leafed through the mementos of a simpler time. But as I reached the bottom of the box, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A smaller, unmarked box was nestled beneath the papers. Curiosity piqued. I pulled it out. "What have we here?" I whispered, carefully lifting the lid. My breath caught in my throat. The box was filled to the brim with Polaroid photos, their colors slightly faded but still vibrant. I picked up the first one and my heart skipped a beat. It was me, no older than 5 or 6, standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. My pigtails were askew, and I was grinning widely, missing my 2 front teeth. But that was impossible. I'd never been to the Lincoln Memorial as a child. We'd never even left our small town until I was in high school. "Mom?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Can you come up here for a sec?" I heard her sigh from downstairs. "Samantha, I told you we don't have time for a trip down memory lane. Just pack what you can and—" "Mom, please," I interrupted, unable to keep the urgency from my voice. "It's important." A few moments later, I heard her climbing the ladder. She appeared at the top, slightly out of breath, her graying hair escaping from its usual neat bun. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I held out the photo. "Do you remember this?" Mom's brow furrowed as she took the Polaroid, squinting in the dim light. "That's odd," she murmured. "I don't recall this at all. Are you sure this is you?" "Of course it's me, Mom. Look at those ridiculous pigtails you always insisted on." I tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. "But I've never been to the Lincoln Memorial. At least I don't remember ever going there as a kid." Mom's frown deepened. "No, we never took you to D.C. when you were little. We couldn't afford trips like that back then." She handed the photo back to me, her hand trembling slightly. "Maybe it's just a backdrop, like they have at carnivals sometimes." I shook my head, already pulling out more photos from the box. "No, look. Here's another one at the Washington Monument, and the White House. Mom, these are real places." As I spread the photos out on the dusty attic floor, a chill ran down my spine. Each image showed me at various ages, always smiling, always in places I had no memory of visiting. The Space Needle in Seattle, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, the St. Louis Arch. "I don't understand," I whispered, more to myself than to Mom. "How is this possible?" Mom knelt beside me, her face pale in the dim light. "I don't know, sweetie. I really don't know." As we continued to sift through the photos, my confusion gave way to a growing sense of unease. These weren't just random snapshots. They were meticulously organized, dated, and labeled with locations. It was as if someone had been systematically documenting my childhood, creating a photographic timeline of events that never happened. "Mom," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "who took these photos?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. I don't know, Samantha. Your father and I, we couldn't have." At the mention of my father, something cold and heavy settled in the pit of my stomach. He had left when I was just a baby, or so I'd been told. I had no memories of him, no photos, nothing but a vague sense of absence that had colored my entire childhood. Could it have been him? I asked, unable to even say the word father. Mom's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. No, she said firmly, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. He left us, Samantha. He couldn't have. But even as she spoke, I was already reaching for another photo. This one was different from the others. The focus wasn't on me, but on a crowded street. And there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was a man. His face was partially obscured, but I could make out a pair of intense eyes that seemed to be looking directly at the camera. My hands began to tremble. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. I think someone was following me all those years, taking pictures, watching, taking..." The implications of what I was saying hung heavy in the air between us. Mom reached out and gripped my hand tightly, her palm clammy against mine. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice shaky but determined, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the photos spread out before me. Each one a moment stolen from a life I didn't remember living. Each one a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know existed until this moment. "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Not yet. We need to understand what this means first. We need to know who did this and why." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Mom, these photos, they're not just pictures, they're clues. To what, I don't know. But I need to figure it out." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching my face. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "But we do this together. No secrets, no going off on your own. Promise me, Samantha." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. "I promise." As we sat there in the dusty attic, surrounded by the ghosts of a past I couldn't remember, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed. The mystery of these photos, of the shadowy figure watching from afar, had opened a door to a part of my life I never knew existed. And as much as it terrified me, I knew I had to walk through that door. I had to uncover the truth no matter where it led, because somewhere out there, someone had been watching me, documenting my life from the shadows. And I was determined to find out who and why. Little did I know as I sat there clutching those mysterious Polaroids that I was about to embark on a journey that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my past, my family, and myself. The truth, as I would soon discover, was far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The kitchen clock ticked relentlessly, each second amplifying the tension in the room. I sat at the table, the mysterious box of Polaroids spread out before me, my fingers idly tracing the edges of a photo showing my 7-year-old self grinning in front of the Statue of Liberty. My mom bustled around, making tea with shaky hands, the clink of china betraying her nervousness. "Mom," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk about this." She set a steaming mug in front of me, her eyes avoiding the scattered photos. "I know, sweetie, I don't know where to start." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "How about we start with Dad?" The mug slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly on the table and spilling hot tea across the worn wood. "Damn it," she muttered, rushing to grab a cloth. As she mopped up the spill, I noticed her hands trembling more violently. "Mom, please," I pleaded. "I need to know. These photos, could Dad have taken them?" She slumped into the chair across from me, her face pale and drawn. "Samantha, your father, it's complicated." "What's complicated about it?" I felt my frustration rising. "He left us when I was a baby, right? That's what you've always told me." Mom closed her eyes. Pain etched across her features. "That's what I believed, yes. But now with these photos, I don't know what to think anymore." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, what you believed? Mom, did you know about these photos?" No, she exclaimed, her eyes snapping open. God, no, Samantha, I had no idea. If I had known someone was following you, taking pictures, I would have done something. You have to believe that. I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. I do, Mom. I'm sorry. It's just, this is all so overwhelming. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I know, sweetie. It's overwhelming for me, too. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unanswered questions hanging heavy between us. Finally, I picked up one of the photos, the one with the shadowy figure in the background. Mom, look at this, I said, sliding it across to her. Do you recognize him? She squinted at the photo, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, she shook her head. I can't be sure. The face is too blurry, but something about the posture, it reminds me of your father. My breath caught in my throat. So it could be him? But why? Why would he leave us and then spend years secretly following me around the country? Mom's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Samantha. Your father, he was a complicated man. There was always a part of him I couldn't quite reach, couldn't quite understand. Tell me about him, I urged, realizing how little I actually knew about the man who had helped bring me into this world. She sighed, her gaze distant. We met in college. He was brilliant, charismatic, always the center of attention. But there was an intensity to him, a restlessness, like he was running from something or towards something. I could never quite tell which. I listened, rapt, as she continued. We fell in love quickly, got married young. When I got pregnant with you, he was over the moon. But as the due date got closer, he became distant, anxious. I thought it was just nerves about becoming a father, but now... Her voice trailed off, and I prompted gently. What happened after I was born? Mom's face crumpled. He was there for the birth, held you in his arms. I'd never seen him look so happy. But then a few days later, he just vanished. Left a note saying he was sorry, that he loved us both, but he had to go. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone. I felt a lump forming in my throat. And you never heard from him again? She shook her head. Not a word. I tried to find him. Hired a private investigator, but it was like he'd disappeared off the face of the earth. I looked down at the photos spread across the table, each one a moment stolen from a life I couldn't remember. But he didn't disappear, did he? He was there all along, watching from the shadows. Mom's voice was barely audible. It seems that way. Determination surged through me. We need to find him, Mom. We need answers. She looked alarmed. Samantha, no. We don't know why he left, why he's been hiding all these years. It could be dangerous. More dangerous than having an unknown stalker following me my entire childhood, I countered. Mom flinched at my words, but I pressed on. Besides, look at these photos. They're not threatening. They're loving. Like he was trying to be part of my life from a distance. Or like he was obsessed, Mom muttered. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. Either way, we need to know the truth. I'm going to find him. How? Mom asked, her voice a mixture of fear and resignation. I paused, my mind racing. The photos. They're our best lead. Maybe if we retrace the locations, talk to people. Someone must have seen him. Mom shook her head. Samantha, these photos span years and cover half the country. It would take forever. Then we'll start with the most recent ones, I insisted. Work our way backwards. I rifled through the box, pulling out the photos with the latest dates. Look, these are from just last year, New York City. Mom's eyes widened. Last year? But you were in college then. How did he know where you were? A chill ran down my spine as the implications sank in. He's been keeping tabs on me all this time, right up to the present. The room fell silent as we both absorbed this revelation. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. What do you want to do, Samantha? I met her gaze, my resolve strengthening. I want to go to New York, retrace my steps from last year, see if anyone remembers seeing him. It's a long shot, Mom warned. I know, I admitted. But it's the only shot we've got. She nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm coming with you. We do this together, remember? I felt a rush of gratitude and love for this woman who had raised me alone, who was now willing to face her own painful past to help me uncover the truth. Together, I agreed, reaching out to squeeze her hand. As we began to plan our trip to New York, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something huge. The mystery of my father, his disappearance and his years of secret surveillance was about to unravel, and I had no idea what we might find at the end of this thread. Would we discover a loving father who had been forced to stay away? A dangerous man with dark secrets? Or something else entirely? Something we couldn't even begin to imagine. As I packed my bag that night, slipping the box of Polaroids carefully inside, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. Tomorrow, we would board a train to New York City, the first step on a journey that would change our lives forever. Little did I know, as I zipped up my suitcase and turned out the light, that the answers we sought would be far more complex and dangerous than anything we could have anticipated. The truth about my father, I would soon discover, was intertwined with a web of secrets that stretched far beyond our little family, touching the highest echelons of power and the darkest corners of society. But in that moment, as I drifted off to sleep, all I could think about was the shadowy figure in those photos, the father I had never known, who had been watching over me all along. And I made a silent promise to myself. I would find him no matter what it took. The journey to uncover the truth about my past had begun, and there was no turning back now. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels against the tracks filled the cabin as we sped towards New York City. I sat by the window, my eyes fixed on the passing landscape, but my mind was elsewhere. In my lap lay a worn road atlas, its pages covered with red marks indicating all the locations from the mysterious Polaroids. Mom dozed in the seat beside me, her face lined with worry even in sleep. I felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into this, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. As the outskirts of the city came into view, I gently shook her awake. "Mom, we're almost there." She stirred, blinking away the remnants of sleep. "Already? It feels like we just left." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Are you ready for this?" She took a deep breath, squeezing my hand. "As ready as I'll ever be." The train pulled into Penn Station with a screech of brakes. We gathered our bags and stepped out into the bustling terminal, the energy of the city immediately enveloping us. "So, where do we start?" Mom asked, her voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. I pulled out the most recent photo from my bag. It showed me standing in Times Square, the neon lights and billboards creating a colorful backdrop. "Here," I said, pointing to the image. "This is from my spring break last year." We made our way through the crowded streets, the towering skyscrapers making me feel small and insignificant. As we emerged into Times Square, I felt a wave of déjà vu wash over me. "This is surreal," I murmured, holding up the photo and comparing it to the scene before us. Mom nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Do you remember anything about that day? Anything unusual?" I closed my eyes, trying to recall. "I was here with my friends. We were tourists for the day, taking silly photos. I don't remember seeing anyone following us or taking pictures." "Maybe we should ask around," Mom suggested. "Someone might remember seeing a man with a camera." We spent the next few hours approaching street vendors, store owners, and even a few police officers, showing them the photo and asking if they'd seen anyone suspicious. But in a place like Times Square, where thousands of tourists take photos every day, our questions were met with shrugs and blank stares. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows between the buildings, I felt my hope starting to fade. "This is hopeless," I sighed, slumping onto a bench. We're never going to find him. Mom sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. Don't give up, sweetie. We've only just started. As we sat there, watching the crowds swirl around us, something caught my eye. An old man was packing up a small stand filled with New York souvenirs. Wait here, I told Mom, suddenly energized. I approached the vendor, the photo clutched in my hand. Excuse me, sir? He looked up, his weathered face creasing into a smile. What can I do for you, miss? I held out the photo. I'm wondering if you might recognize this. It was taken here last year. He squinted at the image, then chuckled. Well, I'll be damned. That's you, isn't it? My heart leapt. Yes. Do you remember seeing me? He nodded slowly. I remember because of the camera. Not many folks use those old Polaroids anymore. I felt my pulse quicken. The camera? You saw who took this picture? Sure did, he replied. Tall fella, kinda scruffy looking. Kept his distance, but I noticed him because he was using that old camera. Seemed out of place, you know? I could barely contain my excitement. Did you see where he went? Or did he say anything? The old man furrowed his brow. Now that you mention it, I did see him head into that camera shop over there. He pointed to a small storefront wedged between two larger buildings. Figured he was getting film or something. I turned to look at the shop, my heart pounding. The sign above the door read, Morley's Cameras Repairs in faded gold lettering. Thank you, I breathed, pressing a few dollars into the vendor's hand. You have no idea how much this means to me. I rushed back to Mom, quickly explaining what I'd learned. Together we hurried across the street to the camera shop. A bell tinkled as we pushed open the door, the smell of chemicals and old paper filling our nostrils. An elderly man peered at us from behind a cluttered counter. Can I help you? I approached, my hands shaking slightly as I placed the Polaroid on the counter. I'm hoping you might recognize the person who took this photo. He was here about a year ago using an old Polaroid camera. The shopkeeper picked up the photo, examining it closely. After a moment, his eyes widened with recognition. Ah, yes, I remember him. Quiet fellow, but he knew his cameras. Came in here quite a few times over the years. Mom and I exchanged glances, hardly daring to breathe. Do you know his name? Mom asked, her voice trembling. The old man shook his head. Never got a name, but he always paid cash and bought the same thing. Film for that old Polaroid and a disposable camera. A disposable camera? I echoed, confused. Yep, the shopkeeper nodded. Said he liked to have a backup in case the Polaroid failed him. Seemed real important to him getting those shots. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Did he ever say why? Why the photos were so important? The old man's face softened. No, but I got the feeling it was personal. There was a sadness about him, you know? Like he was looking at something he couldn't quite reach. Mom's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. This had to be my father. When was the last time you saw him? I pressed. The shopkeeper thought for a moment. Must have been, about 3 months ago. He seemed different that day. Agitated. Bought a whole case of film, said he was going on a long trip. Did he say where? Mom asked eagerly. Not exactly, the old man replied. But I remember him muttering something about going back to the beginning. Does that mean anything to you? I felt a chill run down my spine. The beginning. My mind raced through the photos I'd seen, trying to pinpoint the earliest ones. Thank you, I said to the shopkeeper, my mind already racing ahead. You've been incredibly helpful. As we left the shop, the bell tinkling behind us, Mom turned to me. What are you thinking, Samantha? I pulled out the road atlas, flipping through the pages until I found what I was looking for. The earliest photos, I said, pointing to a spot on the map. They were taken in Washington, D.C. That's where this all began. Mom's face paled. You think he's gone back there? I nodded, a mixture of determination and fear coursing through me. It's our best lead. We need to go to D.C. As we stood there on the bustling New York street, the neon lights of Times Square reflecting in the gathering dusk, I felt like we were on the precipice of something monumental. We were closer than ever to unraveling the mystery of my father, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were also stepping into something far larger and more dangerous than we could imagine. "Are you sure about this?" Mom asked, her voice laced with concern. I met her gaze, seeing my own mix of emotions reflected in her eyes. "No," I admitted. "But I know we have to do it. We've come too far to turn back now." She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Then let's go find your father." As we hailed a taxi to take us back to Penn Station, my mind was already racing ahead to Washington, D.C. What would we find there? Would my father be waiting, ready to explain everything? Or were we walking into something we couldn't possibly be prepared for? One thing was certain: our journey was far from over. In fact, as the taxi wove through the New York traffic, I had the distinct feeling that it was only just beginning. The hunt for answers had led us this far, and I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter where it might lead us. Little did I know, as we sped towards our next destination, that the truth waiting for us in Washington, D.C. would shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and even my country. The hunt for my father was about to become something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the National Mall as Mom and I stood at the base of the Lincoln Memorial. The imposing statue of Abraham Lincoln loomed above us, his stoic gaze fixed on the distant Washington Monument. I held up one of the earliest Polaroids, comparing it to the scene before us. "This is definitely the place," I murmured, my voice hushed in the quiet morning air. "But it looks so different now." Mom peered over my shoulder at the photo. "You were so small," she said, her voice catching. "I can't believe he was here all those years ago." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. The photo showed a younger version of myself, no more than 5 or 6, grinning toothily at the camera. Behind me, the Lincoln Memorial stood just as it did now, timeless and unchanging. "Where do we even start?" Mom asked, her eyes scanning the area. I took a deep breath, trying to focus my thoughts. The shopkeeper in New York said Dad bought disposable cameras as backups. Maybe he got them developed somewhere nearby? We spent the next few hours combing the area around the National Mall, visiting every photo shop and camera store we could find. But with each shake of a head and apologetic shrug from store owners, I felt my hope dwindling. As the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves in a small, cluttered camera shop tucked away on a side street. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and an elderly man looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you, ladies?" he asked, his voice gravelly with age. I approached the counter, pulling out the Polaroid. "I'm hoping you might recognize the man who took this photo. It would have been years ago, but he might have been a regular customer." The old man's eyes narrowed as he studied the picture. After a long moment, he looked up at me, his gaze sharp. "Why are you looking for this man?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He's my father. I'm trying to find him." The shopkeeper's expression softened. "I see. Well, I'm afraid I can't help you directly, but I do remember a man who used to come in here regularly. Always bought disposable cameras, developed rolls of film, never saw his face clearly. He always wore a hat pulled low, kept to himself." My heart raced. "That sounds like him. When was the last time you saw him?" The old man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Must have been, about 3 months ago. He came in looking agitated, bought a whole bunch of supplies, said something about finishing what he started." Mom and I exchanged glances. 3 months ago, the same time frame the New York shopkeeper had mentioned. "Did he say anything else?" I pressed. "Anything about where he might be going?" The shopkeeper shook his head. "Not to me, but—" He paused, seeming to debate with himself. "He did leave something behind that day. Dropped it on his way out. I've been holding on to it, thinking he might come back for it." He disappeared into a back room, returning a moment later with a small, battered notebook. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "Maybe this will help you find what you're looking for." With trembling hands, I took the notebook. "Thank you," I breathed, barely able to contain my excitement. As we left the shop, I clutched the notebook to my chest, afraid to open it in public. We hurried back to our hotel room, the anticipation building with each step. Once inside, I sat on the bed and carefully opened the notebook. Mom perched beside me, her breath catching as we saw the contents. The pages were filled with cramped, hurried writing, dates, locations, cryptic notes. Some pages had rough sketches, others had what looked like code. "What is all this?" Mom whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't know, but look, these dates and locations match up with the Polaroids." As we flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. The notes weren't just about my whereabouts. They referenced meetings, drop-offs, surveillance. My father hadn't just been following me. He'd been involved in something much bigger. "Samantha," Mom said, her voice trembling, "I think your father might have been some kind of agent." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. An agent, but for whom? And why had he left us? Suddenly, a loose page fluttered from the notebook. I snatched it from the air, my heart stopping as I read the words scrawled across it. "Final meeting, old post office, tonight, 9 p.m. The date on the note was today's date. "Mom," I gasped. "He's here, in D.C., tonight." She grabbed the note, her face paling as she read it. "Samantha, no, this is too dangerous. We need to go to the police." But I was already on my feet, grabbing my jacket. "We can't, Mom. What if he runs? This might be our only chance to find him, to get answers." "And what if it's a trap?" she countered, her voice rising with panic. "What if he's involved in something illegal? We don't know what we're walking into." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. She was right. We had no idea what we were dealing with. But the thought of being so close to answers, to finally meeting my father, was too powerful to resist. "I have to go," I said softly. "But you don't. You can stay here, call the police if I'm not back in an hour." Mom stood, her jaw set with determination. "No way. We're in this together, remember? If you're going, I'm going." Relief and love washed over me. "Okay," I nodded. "Let's go find Dad." The sun was setting as we made our way to the old post office building, its clock tower looming against the darkening sky. We positioned ourselves across the street, watching as people came and went. As 9 p.m. approached, the crowd thinned. My eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of the man from the Polaroids. Suddenly I saw him, a tall figure in a dark coat, moving purposefully towards the building. Even from a distance, I recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he moved. "There," I whispered to Mom, pointing. "That's him." Without waiting for her response, I darted across the street, my heart pounding in my ears. "Dad!" I called out, my voice cracking with emotion. The man froze, then slowly turned. As our eyes met, I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of fear. "Samantha?" he breathed, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here?" Before I could respond, a black SUV screeched to a halt beside us. Men in dark suits poured out, surrounding us. "Mr. Johnson," one of them said, his voice cold and authoritative, "you're late for our meeting." My father's eyes darted between me and the men, panic clear on his face. "I can explain," he started, but the man cut him off. "No need. We'll discuss this inside." He turned to me, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with us, Miss Johnson. We have a lot to talk about." As they ushered us towards the SUV, I caught a glimpse of Mom across the street, her face a mask of horror. I tried to call out to her to tell her to run, but a hand clamped over my mouth. The last thing I saw before they pushed me into the vehicle was my father's face, a mixture of regret and resignation, etched into every line. As the SUV pulled away, engine roaring in the night, I realized with a sinking feeling that we had stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. The hunt for answers had led us here, but now I wasn't sure if we'd live long enough to uncover the truth. The city lights blurred outside the tinted windows as we sped into the unknown, leaving behind the life I knew and hurtling towards a future I couldn't begin to comprehend. Whatever my father had been involved in, whatever secrets he had been keeping all these years, I was now irrevocably entangled in it all. And as the reality of our situation sank in, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made a terrible mistake in pursuing this mystery? Or was this the beginning of uncovering a truth that would change everything? The SUV sped through the darkened streets of Washington, D.C., its tinted windows concealing the turmoil within. I sat rigid, sandwiched between two stone-faced men in dark suits, my father across from me, his eyes downcast. The air was thick with tension, broken only by the occasional crackle of a radio. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what's going on? Who are these people?" He looked up, his face a mask of regret and fear. "I'm sorry, Samantha. I never wanted you to be involved in this." Before he could say more, the man to my left spoke sharply. "No talking. You'll both have plenty of time for that soon enough." The rest of the ride passed in suffocating silence. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information we'd uncovered. My father, the mysterious photos, the cryptic notebook. How did it all fit together? After what felt like hours, the SUV came to a stop. We were ushered out into an underground parking garage, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across concrete walls. A nondescript door led to a sterile hallway, and then into a small windowless room furnished only with a metal table and chairs. "Sit," commanded one of the suits, gesturing to the chairs. As we complied, I noticed a large mirror on one wall. Undoubtedly a two-way mirror, I thought, my stomach churning. The door opened, and a woman entered. Unlike the others, she wore civilian clothes, a crisp blouse and tailored slacks. Her piercing green eyes scanned us both before she took a seat across the table. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice cool and professional, "you've been a very difficult man to find, and now we know why." Her gaze shifted to me. "Samantha Johnson, I presume. Your father's been keeping quite a few secrets from you." I straightened in my chair, trying to muster some courage. "Who are you? What do you want with us?" The woman's lips curved into a humorless smile. "My name is Agent Carlson. I'm with a specialized branch of the government. Your father has been working for us for a very long time." I turned to my father, shock and confusion warring within me. "Is this true? You're some kind of secret agent?" He nodded slowly, pain etched across his features. "It's true, Samantha. I never wanted this life for you. That's why I left. To protect you and your mother." Agent Carlson interrupted, her tone sharp. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps you'd like to explain to your daughter exactly what you've been protecting her from all these years." My father's shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of his body. "It started before you were born," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was recruited out of college. My skills in cryptography and data analysis made me valuable to certain agencies. At first, it was exciting. I felt like I was making a difference, protecting our country." He paused, his eyes distant. "But then I met your mother, and everything changed. When we found out she was pregnant with you, I knew I wanted out. I wanted a normal life, a family." "So why didn't you leave?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. "Because by then I knew too much," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. "I had uncovered evidence of corruption at the highest levels of government. Conspiracy, blackmail, even assassination, all orchestrated by a shadow organization embedded within our own intelligence community." Agent Carlson leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Johnson, I'd advise you to choose your next words very carefully." He ignored her, his gaze locked on mine. "They threatened you and your mother. Said if I didn't continue working for them, gathering intelligence, they'd make sure neither of you were safe. So I made a choice. I staged my disappearance, made it look like I'd abandoned you. It was the only way to keep you safe while I continued my work." My mind reeled, trying to process this flood of information. "The photos," I gasped. "You've been following me all these years, watching over me?" He nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "It was the only way I could be part of your life, even if from a distance. I'm so sorry, Samantha. I wanted to tell you so many times, but the risk was too great." Agent Carlson cleared her throat. "As touching as this family reunion is, we have more pressing matters to discuss. Mr. Johnson, the information you've gathered, where is it?" My father's face hardened. "Safe," he replied. "And it will stay that way until I have assurances that my family will be protected." The agent's composure slipped for a moment, anger flashing in her eyes. "You're in no position to make demands, Johnson. That information is vital to national security." "No," my father countered, his voice gaining strength. "It's vital to exposing the corruption that's eating away at our nation's core. I've spent years compiling evidence, building a case that will bring down your entire operation." I watched this exchange, my head spinning. "Dad," I interjected, "what kind of information are we talking about?" He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and determination. "Names, dates, financial records, everything needed to prove the existence of a shadow government operating within our intelligence agencies. They've been manipulating world events, starting wars, toppling regimes, all for their own gain." Agent Carlson stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough. Mr. Johnson, you're under arrest for treason. And as for you, Miss Johnson," she turned to me, her voice cold, "I'm afraid we'll have to detain you as well. For your own protection, of course." As she moved towards the door, presumably to call in reinforcements, my father suddenly sprang into action. With a speed I wouldn't have thought possible, he overturned the heavy metal table, sending it crashing into Agent Carlson. "Samantha, run!" he shouted, already moving towards the stunned agent. Adrenaline surged through me as I bolted for the door. In the hallway, alarms blared, and I could hear shouts and footsteps approaching. My father appeared beside me, grabbing my hand and pulling me along. "This way," he panted, leading me through a maze of corridors. "I've studied the layout of this place for years, just in case." We burst through an emergency exit into the cool night air. The sound of pursuit was close behind us. "Dad?" I gasped as we ran. "Where are we going? What about Mom?" "There's a safe house," he replied, his eyes scanning the street. "Your mother knows about it. It was our emergency plan. We need to get there and retrieve the evidence before they catch up to us." As we rounded a corner, a black sedan screeched to a halt beside us. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. Mom. "Get in, quickly," she shouted, her eyes wide with fear and determination. We dove into the car, and Mom floored the accelerator before we'd even closed the doors. As we sped away, I turned to her in astonishment. "Mom? How did you know where to find us?" She smiled grimly, her eyes fixed on the road. "Your father and I have had a contingency plan in place for years. When I saw them take you, I knew it was time to act." As we weaved through the city streets, sirens wailing in the distance, I felt as though I'd stepped into another world. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaky. My father, who had been checking behind us for pursuit, turned to face me. "To the one place they won't expect, the beginning of it all, the place where I first uncovered the truth and where I've hidden the evidence all these years." As the city lights faded behind us and we headed into the unknown, I realized that this was just the beginning. The hunt for answers had led us here, but the real battle was yet to come. We were now fugitives, armed with explosive secrets that could shake the foundations of our government. I looked at my parents, my mother, whose strength and resilience I'd always known, and my father, the man I was only beginning to understand. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, I felt a strange sense of completeness. "Whatever happens," I said, my voice stronger than I felt, "we're in this together now." My father reached back, squeezing my hand. "Together," he echoed, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. As we drove into the night, leaving behind the life we'd known, I couldn't help but wonder what dawn would bring. But one thing was certain: the truth, no matter how dangerous, was worth fighting for. And we were ready for the fight of our lives. The car sped through the night, headlights cutting through the darkness as we left the city behind. I sat in the back seat, my mind reeling from the events of the past few hours. My father, a man I'd believed had abandoned us, was now sitting next to my mother in the front seat, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. "Where exactly are we going?" I finally asked, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over us. My father turned to look at me, his face etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. "A place I hoped I'd never have to return to," he said softly. "The place where this all began." "And where's that?" I pressed, frustration creeping into my voice. "Dad, I need answers. Real answers." He sighed heavily, exchanging a glance with my mother. "You're right, Samantha. You deserve to know everything. It all started in a small town in West Virginia, a place called Pine Grove." As he spoke, memories of the Polaroids flashed through my mind. "Wait," I interrupted. "I remember seeing photos of me there as a child, but I don't have any memories of the place." My mother's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "That's because we left when you were very young," she explained, her voice tight. We thought we'd escaped." "Escaped what?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. My father turned more fully in his seat, his eyes meeting mine. "Samantha, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, even crazy, but I need you to listen with an open mind. Can you do that?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. He took a deep breath before continuing. "Pine Grove isn't just a town. It's a cover for a secret government facility, one that's been operating outside the bounds of law and ethics for decades. They were conducting experiments on enhancing human cognitive abilities." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What kind of experiments?" "They were trying to create super soldiers, essentially," he explained, his voice low and intense. "People with enhanced intelligence, memory, even psychic abilities. I was recruited as a data analyst to help process the results. But what I saw there, it was horrifying." "Your father tried to expose them," my mother interjected, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "But they were too powerful. They threatened to make us disappear if he didn't cooperate." My father nodded grimly. "That's when we decided to run. We thought we'd gotten away clean, started a new life. But they found us. That's why I had to leave, to keep them focused on me instead of you and your mother." I sat back, my mind struggling to process this flood of information. "But what does this have to do with me? Why were you taking all those photos?" A heavy silence fell over the car. I saw my parents exchange a loaded glance, and my stomach dropped. "Samantha," my father said slowly, you were part of the program, before we escaped." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You were so young," my mother said, her voice choked with emotion. "We didn't think you'd remember. We hoped it wouldn't have any lasting effects." "Effects?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What effects? What did they do to me?" My father turned to face me fully, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "The program was designed to enhance cognitive abilities from a very young age. You showed remarkable progress." "What does that mean?" I demanded, fear and anger warring within me. "Your memory, Samantha," he explained, Haven't you ever wondered why you can remember things in such vivid detail? Why you can recall conversations word for word or memorize complex information after seeing it just once? I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the car. All my life I'd thought I just had a good memory. I'd excelled in school, aced tests without much studying. But this... Are you saying I'm some kind of... experiment? I whispered, horrified. No, my mother said fiercely. You're our daughter. Everything they did, we've spent our lives trying to protect you from it. The photos, my father continued, were a way for me to monitor your progress from afar, to make sure you were safe, and to watch for any unexpected developments. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb this revelation. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. There's more, my father said quietly. The information I've been gathering all these years, it's not just about the corruption in the intelligence community. It's about Pine Grove, about the program. I've been building a case to shut it down, once and for all. But why go back there now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Because that's where I've hidden the evidence, he explained. In the last place they'd ever think to look. We need to retrieve it before they realize what we're doing. As he spoke, the car began to slow. We'd left the highway and were now on a narrow, winding road, dense forest pressing in on both sides. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of lights. We're here, my mother said softly, pulling the car off the road and into a concealed turnoff. As we stepped out of the car, the cool night air hit me like a physical force. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, a stark contrast to the city we'd left behind. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, I could see the dim lights of what I assumed was Pine Grove. What's the plan? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. My father pulled a small device from his pocket, a handheld GPS unit. There's an old maintenance tunnel that leads into the facility. It's how we escaped all those years ago. With any luck, they'll have forgotten about it. As we began to make our way through the forest following my father's lead, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was as if the trees, the very air around us, was familiar somehow. Flashes of memory long buried began to surface. I remember this place, I whispered, causing both my parents to stop and look at me. Not clearly, but feelings, impressions, the smell of the pines, the sound of the wind in the trees. My mother reached out, squeezing my hand. Your first memories, she said softly. We'd hoped they were lost forever. As we continued our trek through the darkened forest, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were fugitives, about to break into a secret government facility to steal classified information. And I was the product of experiments I couldn't even begin to understand. Dad, I said as we paused at the edge of a small clearing, if we get this evidence, what then? What's the end game here? He turned to me, his face set with grim determination. We expose everything. The illegal experiments, the corruption, all of it. It won't be easy and it'll be dangerous, but it's the only way to ensure they can never do this to anyone else. I nodded, feeling a surge of resolve. Whatever I was, whatever they had done to me, I knew one thing for certain. I wanted answers, and I wanted justice. As we approached the outskirts of Pine Grove, the facility looming dark and ominous before us, I realized that this was just the beginning. The hunt for answers had led us here to the very place where it all began, and now we were about to dive headfirst into the heart of the conspiracy that had shaped our lives for so long. Ready? My father asked, his hand on the concealed entrance to the maintenance tunnel. I looked at my parents, my mother, her face a mask of determination, and my father, the man I was only beginning to know. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Ready? I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. As we slipped into the darkness of the tunnel, I couldn't help but wonder what we would find on the other side. But one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. The truth, no matter how terrifying, was waiting to be uncovered, and we were ready to bring it into the light, no matter the cost. The maintenance tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare of rusted pipes and dripping water. Our footsteps echoed ominously as we made our way deeper into the heart of the Pine Grove facility. The beam from my father's flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were descending into the bowels of some ancient, malevolent beast. "How much further?" I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space. My father paused, consulting a hand-drawn map he'd pulled from his pocket. "We're almost there. The access point to the main facility should be just ahead." As we rounded a corner, a heavy metal door came into view. It looked impenetrable, like something you'd find in a bank vault. "This is it," my father said, his voice tight with tension. "Once we're through here, there's no turning back. Are you both sure about this?" My mother reached out and squeezed his hand. "We've come too far to turn back now, John." I nodded in agreement, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'm ready. What's the plan once we're inside?" My father took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "The evidence is hidden in my old office. It's in a safe behind a false panel in the wall. We get in, retrieve the documents, and get out. Quick and quiet." "And if we're caught?" I asked, voicing the fear we'd all been avoiding. A grim smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then we improvise." With that, he turned to the door, pulling a small electronic device from his pocket. He attached it to the keypad next to the door, and a series of numbers began to flash across its screen. "A code breaker," he explained, noticing my curious look. "Should bypass the security system and... there." With a soft beep, the device displayed a 6-digit code. My father quickly punched it into the keypad and we all held our breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the door slowly swung open. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in a sterile, white-walled corridor. The contrast to the grimy tunnel was jarring. "This way," my father whispered, leading us down the hallway. "My old office is on the 3rd floor." As we moved through the facility, I was struck by how quiet it was. Our footsteps seemed to echo forever in the empty corridors. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "It's the middle of the night," my mother replied. "There should only be a skeleton crew on duty." We reached a stairwell and began to climb. Just as we reached the 3rd floor, a voice rang out, causing us all to freeze. "Hey, you there, stop right where you are." My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to see a security guard at the other end of the hallway, his hand moving towards his weapon. In that moment, something strange happened. As I locked eyes with the guard, I felt a sudden intense pressure building in my head. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Stop, you don't see us. We're not here." To my utter amazement, the guard's eyes glazed over. He blinked a few times, looking confused, then turned and walked away as if we weren't even there. I turned to my parents, who were staring at me with a mixture of shock and... was that fear? What just happened?" I stammered. My father's face was pale. "It's the program," he said softly. "Your abilities, they're manifesting. We'll discuss this later." My mother hissed, urging us forward. "We need to move. Now." Still reeling from what had just occurred, I followed my parents down the hallway until we reached a door marked Dr. John Johnson, Research Analytics. My father made quick work of the lock, and soon we were inside. The office was small and cluttered, every surface covered with stacks of papers and old computer equipment. "Watch the door," my father instructed as he moved to a large painting on the wall. He carefully removed it, revealing a safe hidden behind. As he worked on opening the safe, I turned to my mother. "Mom," I whispered, "what's happening to me? How did I do that thing with the guard?" She took my hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and worry. "Sweetheart, the experiments they were designed to enhance cognitive abilities, including telepathic suggestion. We never knew if the effects would be permanent or if they'd manifest later in life. Before I could respond, my father let out a triumphant, "Got it." He pulled a thick manila envelope from the safe. "Is that it?" I asked, moving closer. "All the evidence?" He nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Everything we need to blow this whole operation wide open. Financial records, experiment logs, names of everyone involved. It's all here." Just then, an alarm began to blare. Red lights flashed in the hallway and we could hear the sound of running footsteps. "They know we're here," my mother said, her voice tight with fear. My father quickly stuffed the envelope into his jacket. "We need to move now." We burst out of the office only to find both ends of the hallway blocked by armed security personnel. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" I felt the same pressure building in my head as before, but stronger this time. Without fully understanding what I was doing, I stepped forward, my eyes locked on the guards. "You don't want to stop us," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't recognize. "You want to let us pass. We were never here." To my amazement and my parents' visible shock, the guards lowered their weapons. Their eyes became unfocused, and they stepped aside, creating a path for us. "Go," I urged my parents. "I don't know how long this will last." We ran, taking advantage of the guards' confusion. As we raced down the stairs, I could hear shouts and footsteps behind us. Whatever I'd done, its effects were wearing off. We burst out of the stairwell into the main lobby, only to find it swarming with more security personnel. At their center stood a familiar face, Agent Carlson. "It's over, Johnson," she called out, her voice cold. "There's nowhere left to run. Hand over the documents, and perhaps we can work something out." My father stepped forward, shielding my mother and me. "You know I can't do that, Carlson. This ends now. All of it." As they faced off, I felt the pressure in my head building to an almost unbearable level. Suddenly, every computer screen, every electronic device in the lobby, burst to life. Images began to flash across them. Snippets of documents, video clips of experiments, financial records. It was as if the contents of the envelope my father carried were being broadcast for all to see. Everyone in the lobby froze, staring at the screens in shock. Agent Carlson's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. How are you doing this?" she stammered, her composure cracking. I stepped forward, my head pounding but my voice steady. "It's over," I said, echoing my father's words. "The truth is out. You can't hide it anymore." As if on cue, we heard the sound of helicopters approaching. Through the lobby windows, we could see news vans pulling up outside the facility. Agent Carlson's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Stand down," she ordered her men, her voice hollow. As the lobby erupted into chaos with security personnel trying to contain the situation and employees staring at the incriminating evidence displayed all around them, my parents pulled me close. "You did it, Samantha," my father said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and awe. "You've exposed everything." I leaned into their embrace, feeling drained but triumphant. "We did it," I corrected him. Together. As we watched the facility being swarmed by law enforcement and media, I knew that this was just the beginning. The truth was out, but there would be battles ahead. Legal fights, public scrutiny, and the personal challenge of coming to terms with who and what I truly was. But looking at my parents, seeing the love and determination in their eyes, I knew we could face whatever came next. We had fought for the truth, and now it was time to face it. All of it, head on. The hunt for answers had led us here, to this moment of revelation and reckoning. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt ready to face it. Because now, finally, we had the truth on our side. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. After the dramatic exposure at Pine Grove, we were thrust into a maelstrom of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and government inquiries. The evidence my father had gathered, combined with my unexpected psychic broadcast, had blown the lid off one of the biggest conspiracies in modern American history. We found ourselves sequestered in a safe house provided by a sympathetic senator who had long suspected foul play within certain government agencies. The small, nondescript suburban home was a far cry from the high-tech facility we'd escaped, but it felt like a fortress of solitude amidst the chaos. I sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The TV in the living room droned on with yet another news report about the Pine Grove scandal, as the media had dubbed it. Sources close to the investigation suggest that the scope of illegal experimentation may be far wider than initially thought. The question on everyone's mind: how deep does this conspiracy go? My father entered the kitchen, his face haggard from lack of sleep. He'd spent most of the past few days in closed-door meetings with government officials and lawyers. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I managed a weak smile. "As well as can be expected, I guess. It's just a lot to process." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. I wish I could have protected you from all of this." "Dad," I said, my voice firm, "you did protect me. For years. And now we're facing this together." He reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're right. And I couldn't be prouder of you, Samantha. The way you handled yourself at Pine Grove, it was incredible." I felt a flutter of unease at the mention of what I'd done. "About that, have the doctors said anything? About my, abilities?" My father's expression grew serious. "They're still running tests, but preliminary results suggest that the experiments did indeed enhance your cognitive and psychic abilities far beyond what they'd anticipated. Your mind seems to be able to interface with electronic systems in a way they've never seen before." I shuddered, remembering the sensation of connecting with the facility's computers, broadcasting the evidence for all to see. "Is it permanent?" "We don't know yet," he admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll face it as a family." Just then, my mother burst into the kitchen, her face pale. "John, Samantha, you need to see this." We followed her into the living room, where a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. "This just in. Senator Michael Hawthorne, a key figure in the investigation of the Pine Grove facility, has been found dead in his Washington, D.C. home. Early reports suggest a possible heart attack, but given recent events, authorities are not ruling out foul play." My blood ran cold. Senator Hawthorne had been one of our strongest allies, pushing for a full investigation into the shadow organization behind Pine Grove. "This isn't a coincidence," my father said, his voice tight with tension. "They're tying up loose ends." "But we're safe here, right?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Before either of my parents could respond, the lights in the house flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness. "Get down," my father hissed, pulling us to the floor. Not a moment too soon. The sound of breaking glass filled the air as something crashed through the living room window. A small, cylindrical object rolled across the floor, emitting a high-pitched whine. "Flashbang!" my father yelled. "Close your eyes!" Even with my eyes screwed shut and my hands over my ears, the explosion was deafening. My head spun, and I felt disoriented and nauseous. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear the sound of heavy boots on broken glass. They'd found us. In that moment of panic, I felt something stir within me. The same power I'd felt at Pine Grove, but stronger now, more focused. Without fully understanding what I was doing, I reached out with my mind, sensing the electronic devices carried by our attackers, radios, night vision goggles, even the firing mechanisms of their weapons. With a surge of mental energy, I sent out a pulse that fried every electronic device in the vicinity. The house was filled with the sound of crackling electricity and startled shouts. "Now!" I heard my father yell. "Move!" Still dazed, I felt my mother's hand grab mine, pulling me to my feet. We stumbled through the dark house, making our way to the back door. The cool night air hit my face as we burst out into the backyard. "The car," my father panted. "We need to get to the car." We ran across the lawn, the sounds of confusion and anger behind us growing more distant. Just as we reached the garage, a figure loomed out of the darkness. "Stop right there," a gruff voice commanded. I turned to see a man in tactical gear, his weapon trained on us. Even in the dim light, I recognized him, one of the guards from Pine Grove. Time seemed to slow down. I saw my father tensing, ready to make a move. My mother's hand tightened on mine. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on the guards. "You don't want to hurt us," I said, my voice ringing with that same strange authority I'd felt before. "You want to help us escape. We're the good guys here, remember?" The guard's eyes glazed over, his weapon lowering slightly. I want to help you escape," he repeated, his voice uncertain. "That's right," I continued, feeling the strain of maintaining the mental connection. "You're going to count to 100 very slowly, and then you'll forget you ever saw us. Understand?" He nodded slowly, then began to count. 1, 2, 3. "Go," I whispered to my parents. We slipped past the guard and into the garage. My father quickly hotwired our assigned vehicle, and soon we were speeding away into the night. As we put distance between us and the safe house, the adrenaline began to wear off. I slumped in the back seat, feeling drained and slightly sick. "Samantha?" My mother's worried voice came from the front seat. "Are you all right?" I nodded weakly. "Just tired. Using that, whatever it is, it takes a lot out of me." My father's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "What you did back there, it saved our lives. But we need to be careful. We don't know the full extent of your abilities, or what using them might do to you." I knew he was right, but I also knew that my newfound powers might be our best chance of survival. "So what now?" I asked. "Where do we go from here?" My father's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "We need to go underground for a while. I have some contacts, people who aren't on anyone's radar. They can help us regroup and plan our next move." "Next move?" my mother asked, her voice tight with worry. "John, haven't we done enough? Maybe we should just turn ourselves in, ask for protection." He shook his head firmly. "We can't trust anyone in the government right now. Not with what we know, and especially not with what Samantha can do. If we turn ourselves in, best case scenario is we disappear into some black site facility. Worst case, well, let's just say there are people who would go to great lengths to study or control Samantha's abilities." A chill ran down my spine at his words. I knew he was right. What I could do was unprecedented, and there were undoubtedly those who would see me as an asset to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. "So we keep running," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My father nodded. "For now. But we're not just running away. We're running towards something. The truth is out there, but there's still more to uncover. The people behind Pine Grove, the ones pulling the strings, they're still out there, and we're going to find them." As we drove through the night, the city lights fading behind us, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. We were fugitives now, hunted by forces we didn't fully understand. But we were also on a mission to expose the full extent of the conspiracy, to bring those responsible to justice, and to ensure that what happened at Pine Grove could never happen again. I looked at my parents in the front seat, my mother, her face set with worry but also fierce determination, and my father, the man whose quest for truth had set us on this path. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known before. Whatever came next, whatever challenges we faced, we would face them together. And with my newfound abilities, as frightening and unpredictable as they were, I knew we stood a fighting chance. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, I made a silent vow. We would not only survive this, but we would see it through to the end. The hunt for answers had become a quest for justice, and I was ready for whatever lay ahead. Little did I know as we sped towards an uncertain future that our greatest challenges and our greatest revelations were yet to come. The abandoned warehouse loomed before us, its rusted metal exterior a stark silhouette against the setting sun. After weeks on the run, following leads and dodging pursuers, we had finally tracked down the heart of the conspiracy, the secret headquarters of the shadow organization behind Pine Grove. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "Are we sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father nodded grimly, his eyes never leaving the building. "As sure as we can be. My contact swears this is where the leadership meets. If we're going to expose them once and for all, this is our chance." My mother squeezed my hand. "Samantha, you don't have to do this. Your father and I can—" "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I felt. "We're in this together. Besides, you might need my abilities." The word still felt strange on my tongue. In the weeks since our escape from Pine Grove, my psychic powers had grown stronger, more controllable. But they still frightened me sometimes, reminding me of the experiments that had shaped my childhood without my knowledge. My father checked his watch. "It's time. Remember the plan. We get in, access their central computer system, and broadcast everything. Every dirty secret, every illegal operation, all of it." We moved silently towards the building, using the growing shadows as cover. As we approached a side entrance, I focused my mind, reaching out to the electronic lock. With a soft click, the door swung open. "Nice work," my father whispered, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in a dimly lit corridor. The contrast between the decrepit exterior and the high-tech interior was jarring. Sleek computer terminals lined the walls, and I could feel the hum of powerful servers somewhere deeper in the building. As we crept forward, voices echoed from a room ahead. My father held up a hand, signaling us to stop. We pressed ourselves against the wall, listening. "The situation is under control," a stern female voice was saying. With a jolt, I recognized it as Agent Carlson. "The Johnson family has gone to ground, but it's only a matter of time before we find them." "Time is a luxury we no longer have," replied a deep, authoritative male voice. "The Pine Grove exposure has drawn too much attention. We need to accelerate the program." "Sir," Carlson protested, "the subjects aren't ready. The side effects are irrelevant." The man cut her off. "We're on the brink of creating the perfect human weapon. A few casualties are acceptable losses." I felt sick to my stomach. They were talking about people, experiment subjects like I had been, as if they were disposable tools. My father motioned for us to keep moving. We needed to find the central server room. As we rounded a corner, an alarm suddenly blared to life. Red lights flashed along the corridor. "Intruder alert," an automated voice announced. "Security breach in Sector 3. "Run," my father shouted, abandoning stealth. We sprinted down the hallway, the sound of booted feet and shouted orders growing closer behind us. Ahead, I saw a heavy metal door marked Server Room. "There," I yelled, pointing. As we reached the door, I placed my hand on the access panel, concentrating hard. The lock disengaged with a hiss, and we tumbled inside, slamming the door behind us. The server room was a cavernous space filled with rows of blinking machines. My father rushed to a central terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Cover the door," he instructed. "I need time to break through their security protocols." My mother took up position by the door, a determined set to her jaw. I stood in the center of the room, trying to extend my senses to connect with the vast network surrounding us. Suddenly, the door exploded inward. Armed guards poured through the opening, led by Agent Carlson herself. "It's over, Johnson," she called out, her weapon trained on my father. "Step away from the computer." Time seemed to slow down. I saw my father's hand inching towards the enter key, ready to initiate the data dump that would expose everything. I saw my mother tensing, ready to throw herself between us and the guards, and I felt something building inside me, a surge of power unlike anything I'd experienced before. With a cry that was part fear and part defiance, I threw my arms wide. A wave of energy pulsed out from me, washing over the room. Every screen, every server, every electronic device in the facility came to life at once. Images and data flashed across the displays, classified documents, video footage of illegal experiments, financial records showing a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of government. It was all there, broadcast not just within the building, but to every connected device in the country. The guards faltered, lowering their weapons as they stared in shock at the screens around them. Agent Carlson's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. "My God," she whispered. "What have you done?" I turned to her, my voice steady despite the strain I felt. "We've told the truth. All of it." The deep voice we'd heard earlier boomed from a speaker. "Shut it down. Shut everything down now." But it was too late. I could feel the information spreading, impossible to contain. News stations were picking it up, social media was exploding, and government agencies were scrambling to respond. As the reality of what we'd accomplished sank in, I felt my strength giving out. My knees buckled, and I would have fallen if my mother hadn't caught me. "Samantha," she cried, lowering me gently to the floor. "Are you all right?" I nodded weakly, my head pounding. "It's done," I managed to say. "They can't hide anymore." My father knelt beside us, his face a mix of concern and fierce pride. "You did it, kiddo. You exposed them all." Agent Carlson approached slowly, her weapon lowered. She looked shell-shocked, her usual composure shattered. "I never knew," she said softly, "the extent of it all. I thought I was serving my country." Before anyone could respond, a new commotion arose from the hallway. We turned to see a group of people in suits pushing their way into the room, flanked by uniformed FBI agents. "FBI," a woman at the front of the group announced. "Everyone stay where you are." The lead agent, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, surveyed the scene. Her eyes landed on my father. "Dr. Johnson, I presume?" He nodded, standing slowly. "And you are?" "Special Agent Rebecca Chen," she replied. "We've been investigating rumors of a shadow organization within the intelligence community for years. Looks like you just blew the whole thing wide open for us." As Agent Chen began coordinating the securing of evidence and the arrest of key personnel, including a stunned Agent Carlson, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. We'd done it. My father helped me to my feet, supporting me as we made our way out of the server room. As we passed the rows of screens still displaying the damning evidence, I saw faces I recognized: politicians, business leaders, high-ranking military officials. The conspiracy went deeper than we'd ever imagined. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. My father squeezed my shoulder. "Now we tell our story, the whole truth, from the beginning. It won't be easy. There will be trials, hearings, probably years of legal battles. But the truth is out there now. It can't be buried again." As we emerged from the building into the cool night air, I saw a sea of flashing lights, police cars, ambulances, and a swarm of news vans. The world was waiting to hear our story. I took a deep breath, feeling both drained and oddly energized. We had started this journey searching for answers about our past, about who I was and what had been done to me. But somewhere along the way, it had become about so much more. We had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of our democracy, and we had exposed it to the light of day. As reporters began to swarm around us, microphones thrust in our faces and cameras flashing, I felt my parents' hands in mine. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The hunt for answers was over, but our fight for justice, for ourselves and for all the other victims of Pine Grove, was just beginning. And as I looked up at the star-filled sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. The experiments that had shaped my childhood had given me incredible abilities, but it was the love of my family and our unwavering pursuit of the truth that had made me who I was. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready. We all were. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in keeping secrets. but in revealing the truth, no matter the cost. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the hospital room, a rhythmic reminder of life's fragility. I sat by my father's bedside, my hand gently holding his, willing him to open his eyes. The events of the past few days had taken their toll on all of us, but none more so than him. My mother dozed fitfully in a chair on the other side of the bed, dark circles under her eyes testament to her vigil. The TV in the corner of the room was muted, but I could see the constant stream of breaking news headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Our story, the exposure of the shadow organization, the Pine Grove experiments, all of it, had become the biggest news event of the decade. A soft knock at the door roused me from my thoughts. Special Agent Rebecca Chen entered, her face etched with concern. "How is he?" she asked quietly, nodding towards my father. I sighed, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Stable, but still unconscious. The doctors say the stress of everything, plus the..." I hesitated, still struggling to talk about it. "The bullet wound, it's a lot for his body to handle." Agent Chen nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Samantha. Your father is a hero. What he did, what all of you did, it's changed everything." I managed a weak smile. "It doesn't feel very heroic right now." She pulled up a chair, her voice low so as not to wake my mother. "I know it's been overwhelming, but I need to update you on what's happening. The fallout from your revelations, it's unprecedented." I straightened in my chair, suddenly alert. "Tell me." "The president has ordered a full congressional investigation. Several high-ranking officials have already been arrested, and we're uncovering more connections every day. The Pine Grove facility has been shut down, and we're working on identifying and helping all the former test subjects." A lump formed in my throat. "And the other children? The ones like me?" Agent Chen's eyes softened. "We've found some. Not all. Not yet, but we're doing everything we can. Your testimony and your father's evidence, it's been invaluable." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness for those who were still out there, unaware of their true past. "There's something else," Agent Chen continued, her tone becoming more serious. "We've been monitoring chatter from some less than friendly foreign entities. The revelation of the Pine Grove program and your abilities, it's made you a person of significant interest." A chill ran down my spine. "What does that mean?" "It means that even though the immediate threat has been neutralized, you and your family may never be completely safe. There will always be those who would seek to exploit your abilities." Before I could respond, a groan from the bed caught our attention. My father's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition as he saw us. "Dad!" I exclaimed, leaning in close. "How are you feeling?" He blinked slowly, his voice hoarse. "Like I've been hit by a truck. Did we do it?" I squeezed his hand, tears of relief threatening to spill. "We did it, Dad. It's over." My mother stirred, immediately alert when she saw my father was awake. "John, oh, thank God." She rushed to his side, peppering his face with kisses. Agent Chen stood, a small smile on her face. "I'll give you all some privacy. We'll talk more later." As she left, my father's gaze fell on the muted TV, his eyes widening as he took in the headlines. "My God," he whispered. "It really is all out in the open now." I nodded, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. Everything. The experiments, the cover-ups, all of it. The whole world knows now. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "And you, Samantha? How are you handling all of this?" I took a deep breath, considering the question. "I'm okay, I think. It's a lot to process. Knowing what was done to me, what I can do, it's scary. But also, in a way, it's a relief to finally understand." My mother wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "We're here for you, sweetheart. Whatever you need." A comfortable silence fell over the room, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. After a few moments, my father spoke again, his voice stronger. We need to talk about what happens next, he said, his eyes meeting mine. Agent Chen is right. There will be people out there who would love to get their hands on you to study you or use your abilities for their own ends. I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. I know. But what can we do? He smiled, a hint of his old determination shining through. We do what we've always done. We stay together, we stay strong, and we use what we know to make a difference. What do you mean? I asked, intrigued. I've been thinking, he continued, wincing slightly as he shifted in the bed. With the government's blessing, we could set up a program. Not like Pine Grove, something ethical, transparent. A place where people like you, with enhanced abilities, can learn to control their powers, to use them for good. My mother looked skeptical. John, are you sure that's wise? After everything we've been through. He reached for her hand. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. If we don't do something, these people, these children, will be out there alone, scared, not understanding what's happening to them. Or worse, they'll be scooped up by less scrupulous organizations. We have a chance to help them, to make something good come out of all this pain. As I listened to my father's words, I felt something stir within me, a sense of purpose, of possibility. I want to help, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Whatever this program becomes, I want to be a part of it, to help others like me. My parents exchanged a look, pride, worry, and love all mixed together. Are you sure, Samantha? My mother asked. You've been through so much already. I nodded, feeling more certain with each passing moment. I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I feel like I know who I am and what I'm meant to do. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. My father squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. That's my girl. Just then, there was another knock at the door. Agent Chen re-entered, this time accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man in a suit. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's someone here who would like to speak with you. This is Senator James Hawthorne. The name rang a bell, and I suddenly remembered he was the son of Senator Michael Hawthorne, who had been killed for supporting our cause. Senator Hawthorne stepped forward, his face solemn. Dr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, he nodded to each of us. I wanted to come personally to thank you for what you've done. My father believed in your cause, and he paid the ultimate price for that belief. But thanks to your bravery, his death wasn't in vain. He turned to me, his gaze intense. And you, young lady. The country, the world, owes you a debt of gratitude. I've been briefed on your unique abilities. I want you to know that I'm here to help in any way I can. Whatever you need to feel safe, to build a life after all of this, you have my full support. I felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, hope, and a touch of apprehension. Thank you, Senator. Actually, we were just discussing an idea. As we began to outline my father's proposal for a new program to help people with enhanced abilities, I could see the senator's eyes light up with interest. Agent Chen chimed in with suggestions about security protocols and government oversight. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a genuine sense of excitement about the future. We had exposed the truth, brought down a corrupt organization, and now we had a chance to create something positive from the ashes of Pine Grove. As the discussion continued, plans taking shape and possibilities unfolding, I gazed out the hospital room window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It felt fitting, a new day dawning, full of promise and potential. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we might still face, I knew we would meet them head on. Because we had each other. We had the truth on our side. And now, we had a purpose. The hunt for answers had led us here, to this moment of new beginnings. And I was ready, we all were, to step into the light and face whatever the future might hold. As I turned back to my family and our new allies, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. The road ahead would be challenging, but it would also be filled with discovery, growth, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. And that, I realized, was the greatest power of all.